Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. But since wood was also a thorn in the human god's side, things were different. Ha ha ha. First, you attack without warning. Then, you want to settle this so easily. That's not going to happen. I'd love to meet this human god who set us up and kill him with my own hands, but unfortunately, I've reached my limit. There's no turning back now. Instead of stopping the fight, Dragon God, I have one last request. Fight me with your full power and show me the true pinnacle of this world. As Wood spoke, blood spilled from his mouth, and the golden hair on his head was rapidly turning white. Orsted, seeing this, couldn't help but show a look of regret. As the Dragon God, he could see Wood's true condition. Though Dragon Clan magic was powerful, capable of pulling someone from the brink of death, it couldn't restore a life that was being burned away. Wood's life force was being drained too quickly, far beyond what even Orsted's magic could replenish. Only the legendary elves, with their mastery over the essence of life, might be able to do something, but they were nowhere to be found, and time was running out. Looking at Wood, whose hair had turned completely white in a matter of moments yet still radiated fighting spirit, Orsted said nothing more. He tightened his grip on Jisai, letting his magic power surge once more. Chapter 306, A Shattered Zenith, and the possibility of resurrection. That day, the Dragon King mountain range was anything but peaceful. The numerous flying dragons that should have been resting on the snow-covered peaks suddenly fled from the mountain range in a mass exodus, heading toward the surrounding kingdoms. Even the most ordinary of flying dragons could rival high-level human warriors, and the dragon leaders were said to possess power equivalent to saint-level warriors among humans. Because of its proximity to the Dragon King mountain range, the kingdom of Zilon's borders were also subject to attacks from the dragon horde. Having successfully reached the capital of the kingdom of Zilon, Zenith and Paul had finally found Lilia and negotiated with the kingdom. However, just as they were preparing to return, the dragon horde launched an unexpected assault on the capital, preventing their timely return. Paul, being a high-level swordsman, and Zenith, a saint-level magician, were both hired by the royal family of Zilon as S-rank adventurers to help defend against the flying dragons. During the defense against the dragons, Zenith suddenly experienced a wave of dizziness and nearly got bitten by one of the dragons. Thankfully, Paul's quick reflexes saved her from the beast's maw. Zenith, don't let your guard down. Even though you're a saint-level magician now, these are flying dragons we're dealing with. Paul warned his wife, slashing deep into a passing dragon with a single strike, leaving a wound so deep the bone was visible. I wasn't being careless, but for some reason, I just had a bad feeling. Do you think something might have happened to the kids? Zenith said, her voice filled with worry. Zenith rarely had such ominous feelings, and as a devout follower of the Millie's church, she held great faith in her intuition. You're probably overthinking it. Aisha and Norn are safe with the Litra family in the holy kingdom of Millie's. Even if the flying dragons attack there, Millie's is far stronger than Zilon. They should be able to handle it. As for Wood and Rudius, I honestly don't think we need to worry about them. Those 2 boys are more than capable of handling themselves. In fact, I'd say our situation here might be more of a headache than what they're dealing with. Aisha and Norn were under the protection of the Litra family, so there was no way anything could happen to them. As for his sons, Wood and Rudius, Paul couldn't muster up any concern for them. Rudius was one thing, but Paul had heard during their last visit to Millie's that Wood had already reached the level of a Sword King and had even mastered saint-level magic. Paul's own former glory now paled in comparison to his monstrous sons. Even his precious daughters, who used to dote on him, now looked up to their brother Wood with admiration, leaving little room for their father in their hearts. With one son at the level of Sword King and another at Water King level magic, Paul couldn't understand what Zenith was still so worried about. However, seeing the upset look on his wife's face, Paul quickly backed down and promised that as soon as they dealt with the flying dragons, they'd return home as quickly as possible. Paul, once the head of the family, had never had much authority over Zenith. Now that she was a saint-level magician and they were living with her family, his standing as her husband had diminished even further. On the snow-covered Dragon King Mountain, the dragon god Orsted stood over the lifeless body of the young man, looking down with a deep sense of reflection. The place where they now stood had once been a towering snow-capped mountain. But in their final battle, the entire landscape had been transformed into a basin. Orsted had ultimately agreed to Wood's request, allowing him to die like a warrior. He had unleashed his full power for their final fight. In that last strike, Wood had poured everything he had into a single blow, reaching the level of a true sword god. But even so, Orsted's full power was stronger still. Their final clash had caused the mountain to collapse, transforming the surrounding area into the basin it now was. Wood's heart had been pierced by Orsted's magic sword, Jisai, but in return, Wood had left a deep scar on Orsted's face. The final slash Wood had poured his soul into was so powerful that even Orsted's Dragon Clan secret arts couldn't erase the scar. What an incredible person. Even at the end, he managed to push beyond his limits again. For an ordinary human to step into the god-level domain was something that hadn't happened in centuries. Yet in that final moment, Wood's swordsmanship far surpassed the current sword god among the 7 great powers, making him one of the strongest humans Orsted had ever encountered. Do you regret it? If you hadn't attacked him from the start, he might have become one of your strongest allies in defeating the human god, right? Shizuka Nanahoshi, standing beside the silent Orsted, mused aloud. Witnessing the cruelty of this world once again strengthened her resolve to find a way home. Regret? From his sword, I could sense that even if I hadn't attacked him, he wasn't the type to submit to anyone. What I feel now is anger. That's one more reason to kill the human god. No one uses me, Orsted. Not even him. Orsted's fury was palpable. The human god had once again toyed with him, manipulating him like a puppet on strings. The god seemed to be mocking him, suggesting that just as the first dragon god had fallen into his trap, Orsted would suffer the same fate. In the original script, Orsted's killing of Wood would turn Rudius into his sworn enemy. This was exactly what the human god had planned. To him, both Wood and Rudius were uncontrollable elements. If he couldn't manipulate them, he would at least make sure they wouldn't join forces with Orsted. Whether they lived or died after encountering Orsted was irrelevant to the human god. What mattered was that if they survived, they would surely view Orsted as their mortal enemy. Normally, Orsted's pride would have prevented him from explaining himself to anyone, but after listening to Shizuka, he realized that his pride meant little if it allowed the human god to gloat in victory. Thus, after collecting Wood's body and his weapons, Orsted and Shizuka disappeared into the mountains once more. Later that night, Ruijerd and the Demon Wolf King had escaped the Dragon King mountain range at breakneck speed and arrived at the borders of the Kingdom of Zilon. Upon hearing from Ruijerd that Wood had stayed behind willingly to buy them time to escape, Rudius and Eris fell into a deep depression. They didn't eat or speak for the entire day. After waking, Rudius and Eris wanted to return to the Dragon King mountain to search for Wood, but the Demon Wolf King, who had gone ahead, informed them that the entire mountain had been flattened. Wood's presence was no more. Rudius and Eris couldn't accept it. Rudius wandered around like a soulless doll, and Eris became obsessed with training, vowing to tear Orsted to pieces the next time they met to avenge Wood. Seeing their condition, Ruijerd decided to stay put for a while, allowing them time to recover before moving on. But that day, in the quiet courtyard where they were staying, the person Rudius and Eris hated the most appeared before them once again. Before Orsted could even open his mouth, Rudius had already fired off a Water King level spell at him. At the same time, Eris drew her short sword and prepared to attack. Orsted effortlessly blocked Rudius' spell with one hand and immobilized Eris with a single glance. With a calm, emotionless expression, he spoke. I'm not here to kill you this time. I've come to make a deal. Based on what happened before, I think you've realized by now that we've all been manipulated by the human god. If you've been used by him, that makes you his enemy. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I don't think we should be enemies. Orsted wasn't interested in following the human god's script. After their previous battle, he had also realized that while Rudius wasn't as strong as Wood, he still had potential. What did you do to my brother, Wood? Hearing Orsted's words, Rudius felt a flicker of hope. If Orsted was here to negotiate, maybe Wood wasn't dead yet. But that hope was shattered in the next moment. With a wave of his hand, Orsted opened a storage space. Wood's broken body and his 2 swords appeared on the ground, utterly devoid of life. The air in the courtyard plummeted to freezing in an instant. Seeing his brother's corpse, Rudius' eyes turned bloodshot as several magic circles formed in front of him, unleashing 3 different spells at Orsted in a coordinated assault. I'm going to kill you. Eris, on the other hand, broke down into a frenzy upon seeing Wood's remains. Though Orsted's earlier intimidation had frozen her in place, she forced her body to move again through sheer willpower, even resorting to self-harm to regain control of her limbs. Fueled by rage, they attacked with everything they had. But no matter how much fury added to their power, It couldn't change who their opponent was. Orsted, calm and collected, casually opened a barrier with one hand, easily deflecting their combined assault. As he felt the intense hatred from Rudius and Eris, Orsted prepared to speak again. However, before he could, he sensed more malicious attacks closing in from behind. The Demon Wolf King had planned to search the Dragon King mountain range for any trace of wood, but on the way back, he had unexpectedly crossed paths with Zenith and the others. When Zenith learned that Rudius and Eris were also in the kingdom of Zilon, she was overjoyed and asked the Demon Wolf King about their journey. The Demon Wolf King hesitated, unsure of how to explain everything, until they arrived at Rudius' rented house and overheard the conversation between Rudius and Orsted. The moment Zenith saw Wood's weapons and his broken body on the ground, the normally gentle and devout mother blacked out in fury. Ruijerd, Rudius, Eris, the Demon Wolf King, Paul, Lilia, and Zenith, all of Wood's friends and family, stood there, their eyes filled with seething hatred as they glared at Orsted. Zenith's eyes were particularly bloodshot, and in her blind rage, she was prepared to charge in and fight Orsted hand to hand. I told you, didn't I? If we were going to negotiate, I should have done the talking. With your personality, this was bound to happen. Now look, you've maxed out their hatred. Shizuka sighed, feeling her scalp tingle as she sensed the rising hostility. Though she had great faith in Orsted's abilities, she feared that if she didn't step in soon, they would all be torn apart by sheer fury. Everyone, please calm down. We didn't come here to provoke you. In addition to clearing up some misunderstandings, we also have some important news. Wood Greyrat still has a chance to be resurrected. At the sight of the enraged Greyrat family, Shizuka wisely chose not to mince words. She cut straight to what they cared about most. Resurrection might sound far-fetched, but I assure you it's possible. As you already know, the man standing before you is the dragon god Orsted. It's not exactly resurrection, but Orsted possesses powerful dragon clan secret arts that can preserve memories and send someone back to a previous point in time. In other words, while Wood Greyrat from this timeline is dead, Orsted can take us back to a time before the battle ever took place. Orsted's power was less about resurrection and more about resetting the timeline. However, Orsted himself would retain all his memories, similar to the power of a certain battle-scarred male protagonist blessed by a witch. Time loops. But if Wood returns to that time, will he still be the same Wood? Rudius asked, his voice trembling with hope and fear. If I use my Dragon Clan secret technique to reset the timeline, none of you will remember Wood's death, nor will you recall ever meeting me. Orsted himself wasn't entirely sure of his own words as he spoke them. Logically, his time-looping ability should only affect the timeline itself, not the entire world. In other words, it couldn't alter parallel worlds. Yet in all his hundreds of loops, Orsted had never encountered individuals like Wood, Rudius, or Shizuka Nanahoshi. Chapter 307, The End of the Simulation, and the Possibility of Returning Again. The Dragon God, Orsted, was a man of integrity, unlike the scheming human god. Without hesitation, he followed up with a warning about potential risks that could arise. It doesn't matter. As long as there's a chance, even 1%, that Wood can come back, I'll hold on to it with everything I've got. Whether it's my memories or something else you need from me, I'll give it all. Just let my child come back to me. Zenith cried, kneeling on the ground, clutching Wood's cold, lifeless body as tears streamed down her face. Hearing Zenith's plea, Rudius slowly lowered his magic staff, pride of the Water Dragon King. Despite seeing Orsted as a dangerous figure, one no different from the human god, Rudius, like Zenith, couldn't accept Wood's death. Even the smallest chance of bringing him back was something he couldn't afford to abandon. What do you want from us? You didn't just come here out of the goodness of your heart to grant our wishes for free, did you? Rudius asked, glaring at Orsted with hostility. While the human god was the mastermind, Orsted had still been the executioner, and for that, Rudius hated him deeply. Yet, they couldn't act against Orsted now. Setting aside whether they could match his strength, the main issue was that Orsted was their only hope of bringing Wood back. Using the Dragon Clan secret arts to return to the past will consume a significant amount of my magic power. Normally, I'd have enough, but after my battle with Wood Greyrat, my reserves were greatly depleted. We'll need time for my magic to recover, or if you happen to have a way to quickly replenish my power, such as storing magic crystals, that would help speed up the process. As for what I want you to do for me, even if I didn't say it, I'm sure you'd do it anyway. I need your help to eliminate the human god, once and for all. Upon learning that the so-called human god was the one who had orchestrated everything, leading to Wood's death, Zenith immediately agreed to the dragon god's deal on behalf of the entire Greyrat family. For Zenith, as long as there was hope for Wood's return, she was willing to do anything. Besides, their target was already their sworn enemy. With Zenith, the true head of the family, agreeing, Paul and Lelia had no objections, fully supporting the decision. This was, after all, their shared goal. As for Rudius, though he still didn't fully trust Orsted, he couldn't bring himself to refuse. After all, it had been Rudius who suggested going to the Dragon King mountain range, and Wood had died while buying them time to escape. In a way, Wood's death could be attributed 50% to the human god, 30% to Orsted for delivering the fatal blow, and at least 20% to Rudius himself. In some sense, both Rudius and Orsted had been pawns in the human god's game. Orsted was the weapon, while Rudius, unknowingly, had pushed Wood towards that weapon. Rudius had noticed that, after learning the full truth, Zenith hadn't blamed him. However, the subtle distance in her gaze towards him stung even more than words ever could, filling him with pain and guilt. But Rudius held no complaints. He believed Wood had died because of him. Though they were twins, Zenith had always shown more affection for Rudius than for Wood. In their infancy, Wood had been cared for by Lelia, while Rudius had been in Zenith's arms. As a magic user herself, Zenith had naturally been more drawn to Rudius, who had demonstrated greater magical talent from a young age. Even as they grew older, it was Wood, the younger of the two, who had left home first to begin his training. It wasn't until Paul's and Lelia's affair came to light that Zenith realized, with shame, how much she had neglected her second son, Wood. It was no wonder Wood preferred Lelia's company. Perhaps it was her failure as a mother. Wood, with his mature mind and thoughtful nature, had always been meticulous, seemingly indifferent on the surface, yet caring deeply for every member of the family. Whether it was Paul's and Lelia's scandal, Aisha's and Norn's strained relationship, or even Zenith's conflicts with her mother, Claire Litra, Wood had always been aware. He even hid his strength to protect Rudius' pride. All these little things that even Rudius himself had failed to notice, were handled by Wood. That boy had always smiled so kindly, exuding an aura of humility despite his incredible talent and strength. Even Claire, the most critical of people, had praised Wood to no end, wanting him to inherit the Litra family name and become its future head. But the more perfect Wood appeared, the more Zenith's heart ached. Such a wonderful, selfless child, always thinking of his family, had now become a cold, lifeless body in her arms. How could Zenith ever accept that? Back in the Maze City, Wood had nearly died once before while protecting her and Norn from the Hydra. Now, he had chosen to sacrifice himself again to save his brother. Every time Wood faced danger, it wasn't for his own sake but for his family. After exchanging information about the human god, Orsted left, leaving the Grey Rat family in an atmosphere of sorrow and grief. Wood's death had hit Zenith the hardest. For days, she hadn't spoken a single word, her mental state worrying both Paul and Rudius. Rudius had tried to comfort her, but she had silently pushed him out of the room. Wood's body had been preserved by Rudius' ice magic, and they planned to return him home for burial. However, before that, they needed to head back to the Holy Kingdom of Milius to retrieve Aisha and Norn. When the two young girls learned of their brother Wood's death, they wept for days, resenting their other brother, Rudius. They blamed him, believing that if Wood hadn't gone to save Rudius or hadn't listened to him, he wouldn't have died. After Wood's death, Rudius painfully realized that his family's attitude towards him had shifted. But he had no words to offer, for if he hadn't trusted the human god, Wood wouldn't have been caught up in this disaster. Feeling weak and powerless, Rudius bid his family farewell and set off for the Magic Academy. He had to grow stronger, not only to take revenge on the human god but also to find a way to bring Wood back. In the past, such a goal would have been a fool's dream, but this was a different world now. With magic in existence, anything was possible. After all, with reincarnations and time loops already in play, why should resurrection be considered impossible? In the world of One Piece, Wood slowly opened his eyes, waking up once again in his own bed. The 12 years of Wood Greyrat's life seemed like nothing more than a fleeting dream. Yet the memories were so vivid, so real, as if they had truly happened. Just like my first life simulation, this one left behind so many regrets. System, if I get another chance at life simulation, is it possible for me to return to the previous world? Compared to the zero familiar world, the world of jobless reincarnation had left Wood with far deeper regrets. Due to his lack of understanding of that world, Wood hadn't even realized who had manipulated him in the end. If he had the chance to return, he would make sure to personally kill that so-called human god. Wood hadn't expected a response from the system, which usually remained silent. But to his surprise, this time, the system provided a thorough answer. Returning to a previously simulated world wasn't entirely impossible. There were generally two scenarios in which it could happen. First, Wood's simulations were random selections from the infinite worlds, meaning if he happened to draw a jobless reincarnation again, he would naturally return to that world. However, this was an incredibly rare occurrence, and even if it did happen, the timeline would reset, and Wood might not even be the same Wood Greyrat. The second possibility was if the internal factors of the simulated world itself influenced the situation. Though the simulated worlds were simulations, they were, in fact, real existing worlds in alternate dimensions. These worlds continued to operate normally even after Wood left. If someone in that world used abilities like resurrection or soul summoning to bring Wood Greyrat back to life, the system would automatically detect that Wood had not truly died, allowing his life simulation to continue. After hearing the system's explanation, Wood dismissed the first possibility, as the chances of it happening were lower than winning a lottery. The second possibility, however, seemed more plausible. After all, it was a magical world where resurrection wasn't out of the question, and Rudius was a protagonist with special powers. If Wood ever returned to the world of jobless reincarnation, he vowed that the next time, when he was stronger, he would crush both the dragon god and the human god. Ding. Your simulated character has died. This multi-world life simulation is now complete. You have acquired the following abilities from Wood Greyrat: swordsmanship, sword god style, north god style, water god style magic, fire magic, emperor level, water magic, emperor level, healing magic, king level, wind magic, king level, earth magic, king level. Due to learning magic, your mental and willpower attributes have increased significantly. The multi-world life simulation has ended. Besides the fixed rewards from the simulated character, you may select one of the following rewards. 1. Magic Eye. Future Sight 2. Hydrophysique. Magic Resistance 3. Sword Dragon's Fang. Magic Conductive Attribute, can be grafted onto Tenku and Assetsu to enhance their quality. The fixed rewards were powers that Wood Greyrat had learned, while the random rewards were drawn from his encounters. As he looked at the three options in front of him, Wood felt a bit disappointed that neither the dragon god's nor the human god's abilities had appeared. However, the abilities on offer weren't weak either. First, the Magic Eye. Future Sight was a power possessed by Rudius, said to have been acquired from a self-proclaimed magic emperor Lili. The effect allowed the user to consume magic to briefly see a few seconds into the future, similar to the advanced observation haki that Katakuri and others possessed. Just based on the description, it was clear this ability was incredibly powerful. Unlike Katakuri's passive foresight, this magic eye could be actively controlled. Honestly, Wood was tempted to choose this ability, but the other two rewards were also highly appealing. In comparison, the ability to briefly foresee the future was the first power Wood eliminated from consideration. After all, his observation haki was already highly developed. Being able to predict the future was something he could eventually achieve through his own training. In other words, while the magic eye was undoubtedly powerful, it was redundant. As for the Hydrophysique's magic resistance, it was highly tempting as well. While magic didn't exist in the world of One Piece, there were plenty of Devil Fruit users with a wide variety of abilities. Setting aside Paramsha and Zone types, the attacks from Logia-type Devil Fruit users were essentially elemental magic. With a Hydra's level of magic resistance, Wood would likely be able to negate a significant portion of the damage from Logia users, if not entirely. Finally, the third reward was easy to understand. It allowed Wood to transfer the magic conductive properties of Wood Greyrat's sword, Dragon's Fang, onto his current swords, Tenku and Assetsu. Ultimately, Wood chose the third option after some deliberation. That is, he opted to transfer the properties of Dragon's Fang to his swords, Tenku and Assetsu. Some might argue that Wood had chosen the least useful reward of the three, but he had made this decision after careful consideration. While Dragon's Fang seemed like the least impressive option, it was actually the most practical for Wood. In the world of One Piece, the power system was highly versatile, allowing for the use of magic. However, this world lacked magic staves. Even without a staff, Wood could cast magic to a certain extent, but he couldn't perform high-level spells. Furthermore, in the world of jobless reincarnation, Wood had mastered an advanced form of swordsmanship that combined magic with sword techniques, known as the Hyaki Yagyo sword style. Without materials that could conduct magic, Wood's newly developed elemental sword techniques would be rendered useless, and the techniques he had gained from jobless reincarnation would be severely diminished. Without a magic conductive medium, his magic would be limited to mid-level spells. Hardly a threat in the world of One Piece. Chapter 308, The Establishment of Wood's Weapons Company. Moreover, after further consideration, Wood noticed that the reward for the Hydra's magic resistance had a hidden downside. While the ability raised his resistance to magical elements, it also made him as fragile as the Hydra itself in terms of physical defense. In other words, his resistance to elemental attacks would improve, but his physical defenses would be reduced. If the second reward had been the Hydra's incredible regenerative ability instead, Wood would have chosen it over the magical resistance without hesitation. But since the reward came with a side effect, Wood had no more doubts about his choice. After confirming the third reward, Two beams of light shot out from the system interface, merging directly into the two swords Wood had placed by his bedside. When he picked up Tenku and drew the blade from its sheath, he could immediately sense the elemental energy in the air becoming exceptionally active. With the new attributes layered onto the blades, both Tenku and Asatsu not only functioned as magic ones now but also became significantly harder and sharper. Tenku, which was originally just a grade 51 fine sword, now felt comparable to a grade 21 great sword in all aspects. As for Asatsu, which had already been classified as a grade 21 great sword, it might not have reached the rank of supreme grade sword, but it was undoubtedly stronger than any ordinary great sword. On the deck of Dark Maru, Robin stood in deep thought, worried as she gazed toward the captain's quarters, where there hadn't been a sign of movement for nearly a month. When Wood had prepared to enter the multi-world life simulation, he had instructed everyone that he would be staying in his quarters for training and that no one was to disturb him under any circumstances. The punishment for disobeying was expulsion from the pirate crew. Faced with such a strict penalty, no one dared to interrupt Wood's training. At first, Robin and Ruth thought their captain had been inspired to train harder after witnessing the battle between Shakes and Golden Lion Shiki. So they hadn't worried much. One immersed herself in her devilish training, not wanting to hold the crew back, while the other worked day and night translating the Pluton blueprints in hopes of freeing Wood from the Navy's clutches. But after half a month passed, both Ruth and Robin realized something was off. Even if Wood was engaged in some intense, isolated training, he should have emerged by now. He had taken a fair amount of food and water into the room, but not nearly enough to last this long. Moreover, if he was truly training, there should have been some noise or movement coming from the room. When 20 days had passed, Robin couldn't sit still anymore. Her work on translating the poneglyphs had slowed down considerably due to her concern for Wood. She wanted to check on him, but every time she recalled Wood's stern warning, she suppressed the urge to open the door. Worried sick about Wood but unwilling to risk punishment, Robin tried to trick Ruth into investigating. However, after spending so much time with Robin, Ruth had wised up and no longer saw her as an innocent little girl. On their ship, the captain, Wood, had one cunning mind, and when all the others combined their efforts, they could maybe match that. But Robin? Her scheming was leagues ahead of the rest of them. Initially, they all thought the title Devil Child was just the world government throwing mud at Robin's name. But after spending more time with her, they realized how fitting that nickname truly was. Robin might look like an angelic, bespectacled bookworm, but when she showed her true colors, even devils would stand aside. The incident with Rosinant being dumped near a Navy branch, only to return staggering and clutching his groin, was proof of that. Ruth, you're the vice captain of this pirate crew. If the captain hasn't shown any signs of life for this long, shouldn't it be your responsibility to check on him? If something bad has happened to Wood, you're the one who'll have to take the fall as his vice captain. Robin said, her tone sharp. Ruth nearly burst out laughing at the sheer audacity of her words. Whenever something went wrong, that was when he became the vice captain. In normal circumstances, though, he might as well have been part of the background. Of course, Ruth was also worried about Wood's condition. Before going into seclusion for training, Wood had inexplicably been unconscious for 2 or 3 days. But Ruth also knew that Wood's earlier warning hadn't been a joke. If they barged in and interrupted something important, or uncovered some deep secret, he might actually get silenced for it. Wood might seem harmless, but Ruth had seen firsthand how the captain had slaughtered hundreds of prisoners in Impel Down in no time at all. Even after more than a year had passed, the memory of that hellish scene still sent shivers down his spine. In a way, Ruth thought Wood and Robin were quite the pair. One was a quiet, bookish girl who turned into the devil child when scheming, while the other, always smiling and sunny like a neighborhood boy, could transform into a living nightmare on the battlefield. Look, I'm not going in there. If you're that worried about the captain, why don't you check on him yourself? After all, Wood dotes on you. If you break the rules, he'll probably just scold you. But if I go in there, I'm dead for sure. Ruth wasn't exaggerating. Normally, both he and Wood, as captain and vice captain, were just figureheads. Robin was the one who truly managed everything on the ship. Wood only made the big decisions, like setting the course or planning significant actions. Other than that, he didn't bother with the day-to-day management. He even had to sweet-talk Robin to get pocket money whenever they docked on an island. Seeing that her plan to trick Ruth had failed and still deeply worried about Wood, Robin finally steeled herself to open the door. But before she could, the door clicked open on its own. "What are you two doing?" Wood stood at the entrance, staring at Robin and Ruth in confusion. After a brief, awkward silence, Robin quickly shifted the blame. "Vice Captain Ruth said the captain hasn't left his room in a month, so he ordered me to open the door and check on you." Ruth was stunned, and as Wood's gaze landed on him, he quickly stammered out his defense. When did I ever say that? Didn't you just say that because Wood spoils me, I wouldn't be punished too harshly, even if I broke the rules? Robin interjected before Ruth could finish. It's true, I said something like that, but what I meant was... Ruth tried to explain. The vice captain is in charge, and I'm just a crew member. To avoid being thrown off the ship, I had to follow orders. Robin added with a straight face. Wood glanced back and forth between the two, quickly piecing together the situation. With a sigh, he said. I know you're both worried about me, but in the future, just wait for me to come out. Everyone has their own secrets, I'm sure you understand that. Of course, if it's truly a life or death situation, feel free to ignore that rule. In the end, Wood didn't punish Robin or Ruth. After a hearty meal, he announced the crew's next destination. Now that they had the initial funds for their operation and the translation of the Pluton blueprints was progressing smoothly, it was time to find a suitable base. Wood decided to establish their headquarters on an island in the first half of the Grand Line. His reasoning was simple: while the New World offered a larger market, it was also home to far more powerful forces. Even though Wood himself was strong, his crew wasn't particularly formidable. In fact, they were relatively weak. To build a sustainable power base, personal strength wasn't enough. If Wood ever left the island, their entire operation could be wiped out. Therefore, he chose to start by setting up their base in a safer, weaker part of the Grand Line. They would slowly build up their weapons company, eventually expanding into the New World and becoming a major player. After reviewing several maps, Wood selected an uninhabited island and officially named it Dark Abyss Island. Don't ask why it had such a strange name. Ask Robin, who had a particular fondness for names related to darkness. Her reasoning was that their company was built around Pluton's technology and would bring darkness to the world government, so Dark Abyss Island was a fitting name. The explanation was flimsy, but to the rough-and-tumble crew members like Ruth, it was far better than the name Wood had suggested. Arena Island. With the island chosen, Wood and his crew made a brief stop at Sabati Archipelago, where they recruited the fishman Tom as their chief engineer. Using the 5 billion Baileys they had stolen from the world government, they began their ambitious plan. Wood had initially invited the entire Tom's workers' crew, including Frankie, who had a natural talent for building weapons. After all, Robin had already been recruited, so taking one more of the Straw Hats members wouldn't make much of a difference. However, Tom declined Wood's request, stating that he didn't want his two apprentices involved in such a dangerous line of work. Tom himself had no choice but to help Wood, given his immense debt of gratitude and his own bounty, but he wanted his apprentices to live peaceful lives. Wood respected Tom's decision and didn't push further. After all, when it came to craftsmanship, Tom was the real prize. Iceberg and Frankie were just extras in comparison. With the location chosen, the funding secured, and the technical expertise in place, all that was left was to gather a workforce and begin production. However, with only around a dozen members in their pirate crew, they lacked the manpower to run a factory. Recruiting outside workers wasn't a viable option, either. Given the dangerous nature of their work, ordinary people wouldn't be willing to join. And hiring pirates came with its own risks. Wood worried about attracting individuals with ulterior motives or worse. Spies from rival pirate crews. As a former double agent himself, Wood was particularly cautious about the potential for infiltration. If someone managed to steal the Pluton blueprints or harm Robin, their entire operation would fall apart. But the solution to the labor shortage soon came to Wood, and it was simpler than he had anticipated. He would recruit the fishmen from Fishman Island. Compared to ordinary humans, fishmen were far stronger, both physically and in other aspects, and they were eager to live on land. Wood needed workers, and the fishmen longed for a life on the surface. It was a perfect match. While most people would struggle to convince fishmen to work for them due to the deep-seated animosity between humans and fishmen, Wood had an advantage. He had ties to Fisher Tiger and Queen Atoheim. With their endorsement, large numbers of fishmen flocked to Wood's island to work for him. Wood provided them with housing, paid them wages, and ensured their safety. In return, the fishmen offered their labor, creating a mutually beneficial arrangement. Thanks to the influx of fishmen workers, the barren island was soon transformed into a bustling hub of activity, with buildings rapidly sprouting across the landscape. At first, some passing pirate crews harbored thoughts of attacking the island. But when they saw the pirate flag flying over it, they quickly abandoned any such notions. After a series of high-profile incidents, Wood's pirate crew was no longer the obscure group it had once been. In the first half of the Grand Line, at least, Wood had become a significant figure among the pirates. He had broken into Impel Down, invaded a navy branch, destroyed an ice lobby, and stolen 5 billion Baileys from the world government. He had faced down several pirate crews and returned unscathed to the first half of the Grand Line. These accomplishments proved that Wood had long outgrown the rookie label, and the bounty on his head was no exaggeration. The year is 1521 of the sea calendar. In the East Blue's Windmill Village, a 17-year-old boy wearing a straw hat, full of dreams of becoming a pirate, stowed himself inside a wooden barrel and officially set sail. Within just a few short months, he met Zoro, the swordsman with the three-sword style, Nami, the money-loving navigator, Usopp, the long-nosed sharpshooter, and Sanji, the flirtatious cook. The Straw Hat Pirates, fresh to the seas, defeated a series of big shots in the East Blue before finally arriving at their final destination in the East Blue. Logtown, the start of the Grand Line. Upon arriving in Logtown, it was inevitable that Luffy and his crew would cross paths with the Marine captain stationed there, the man known as White Hunter Smoker. After witnessing Luffy's calm demeanor during his near execution, eerily reminiscent of the Pirate King, Gol D. Roger, Smoker concluded that Luffy had extraordinary potential and would likely grow into a dangerous figure in the future. Determined to nip this threat in the bud, Smoker abandoned his post in Logtown to pursue the Straw Hat Pirates into the first half of the Grand Line. Captain Smoker, even though we're chasing the Straw Hat Pirates, leaving Logtown without permission and entering the Grand Line like this. If headquarters finds out, there could be consequences. Aboard the Navy battleship, Sergeant Tashigi looked at Smoker, who sat nearby smoking a cigar, and voiced her concerns. I already told you to send a report to Vice Admiral Giant. Did you do that yet? Smoker replied. Whatever the orders from headquarters, we must catch the Straw Hat Boy. In all my years stationed at Logtown, no pirate has ever escaped my grasp. And that kid? He feels dangerous. My instincts have never been wrong. The last person who gave me this feeling is now practically an emperor of the sea. Back then, I didn't have the strength to stop them. But this time, I'll crush this threat before it has the chance to grow. White Hunter Smoker, a famous Marine captain and a Logia-type smoke fruit user, should have been stationed at Navy headquarters, given his exceptional abilities. However, Smoker's straightforward nature and frequent clashes with his superiors resulted in him being sent to a backwater like East Blue to deal with small-time pirates. If not for the protection of Vice Admiral Giant, Smoker might not have risen to the rank of captain at all. In fact, he could have been demoted a long time ago. Even Tashigi was shocked when she first learned that Giant, a highly respected vice admiral, was Smoker's senior and mentor. Tashigi, a rare female marine officer and a swordsmanship fanatic obsessed with collecting famed blades from criminals, had long admired Vice Admiral Giant, a woman known for wielding the mighty Grade 21 greatsword Konpira. What Tashigi didn't understand was why, despite Vice Admiral Giant's evident care for Smoker, he kept his distance from her and often refused her assistance. Driven by curiosity, Tashigi once asked another of Smoker's friends, Colonel Hina, about the reason behind this. Colonel Hina secretly told her that Vice Admiral Giant's care for Smoker was tied to someone from the past. Someone Smoker seemingly resented because of his once strong admiration for them. After being betrayed, that person became the one Smoker most wanted to defeat. The first island of the Grand Line, Whiskey Peak. After crossing the Red Line, the Straw Hat Pirates landed on the first island of the Grand Line and were warmly welcomed. However, this island was one of the strongholds of Baroque Works, a criminal organization that had its sights set on Luffy's 30 million Bailey bounty. In the end, after an epic display of skill from Luffy and Zoro, all the bounty hunters of Baroque Works were defeated. Even Mr. Five and Miss Valentine, who had come to deal with Princess Vivi, were taken down. I can't say it. If I reveal his name, you'll be dragged into this too. Even if you wanted to help me, you wouldn't stand a chance against him. After all, he's one of the 7 warlords of the sea. Crocodile. Nami face-palmed as she listened to Princess Vivi's conflicted words. She had just claimed she couldn't reveal the name of the mastermind but then let it slip anyway. It was as if Vivi was acting, pretending she couldn't say anything when she'd already spilled the beans. Even though we've only known each other a short time, thank you all for everything. While Luffy and Zoro remained blissfully unconcerned despite their newly acquired enemy, Nami, who had spent years navigating the seas, was well aware of just how dangerous the 7 warlords of the sea were. She immediately bid everyone farewell, intending to part ways with the group. But just as she turned to leave, a mole-like creature began rapidly sketching something and then proudly presented Nami with a perfectly detailed portrait. They're Mr. 13 and Ms. Friday, the unlucky duo, tasked with punishment and delivering messages for Baroque Works. Looks like your faces have been recorded, and now you're on their blacklist. Vivi explained. Nami was horrified. She knew of the terror that the 7 warlords of the sea represented, and having crossed one of them, the Straw Hat Pirates now faced the very real prospect of annihilation. No, in this world, Arlong hadn't terrorized Nami's home village, Kokoyashi. But due to the will of the universe, another pirate had filled the void, leaving Nami's hometown in turmoil. Now that their identities were exposed, and Nami realized she was already involved, She quickly struck a deal with Vivi, making sure she wouldn't be working for free. Are the 7 warlords of the sea that strong? How do they compare to Buggy? Luffy, still a new pirate, had no concept of the power these warlords possessed. To him, they just sounded impressive. The 7 warlords of the sea are pirates officially recognized by the world government. They possess devastating power on par with a nation's military and are considered a balancing force on the seas. Each of the warlords is a major figure with a reputation capable of deterring countless smaller pirates. Nami explained. Compared to them, a small fry like Buggy wouldn't even stand a chance. Not against Crocodile or even his top agents in Baroque works. Hearing this, Nami's anxiety grew, while Luffy and Zoro only became more excited at the thought of facing such powerful foes. Then, as if struck by a sudden thought, Luffy turned to Vivi and asked. So, this crocodile guy. Is he stronger than Wood? Vivi was initially confused by Luffy's question, unsure of who Wood was. However, after Luffy gave a brief description, Vivi's face paled. You don't mean that Wood, do you? The one known as the ancient weapon Wood. Wait, Luffy, you're not saying you know the legendary Pluton Wood? How do you know him? Hearing Vivi's shocked reaction, Zoro and Nami grew curious. They had always assumed that the Wood Luffy often mentioned was just some friend from his past. But now, it seemed like something more. After all, the warlords of the sea were already some of the most formidable people in the world, yet Vivi's expression when talking about them wasn't nearly as terrified as when she spoke of Wood. In other words, the Wood that Luffy mentioned might be someone even more dangerous than a warlord. You've heard of the ancient weapons, right? Said to be super weapons from a bygone era, capable of sinking islands with a single shot. Well, this Wood. He's been given the name of one of these ancient weapons. The reason he's called Pluton Wood isn't because he controls one of the ancient weapons. It's because Wood himself has the destructive power and influence equivalent to such a weapon. On top of that, Wood is a weapons dealer with a network that spans across the entire world, deeply entrenched in both legal and underground markets. He is a major figure who commands respect from all sides. Crocodile may be one of the 7 warlords of the sea and a powerful pirate, but compared to Wood, he's still several leagues behind. Of course, I can't say for certain who would win in a fight between the two. But there are rumors that Wood's influence and strength rival that of the 4 emperors. Years ago, the world government even tried to recruit him as a warlord, but he turned them down. Vivi's explanation left Nami and the others wide-eyed, their understanding of the world forever changed. Back in East Blue, they had thought someone like Buggy was a top-tier pirate. Now, having entered the Grand Line, they realized just how small their previous world had been. The 7 warlords of the sea, the 4 emperors. These were forces so powerful that the Straw Hats could barely comprehend them. Luffy, you know this Wood, right? Can't you contact him? Get him to come deal with Crocodile, and then we'll be safe. Desperate to avoid certain death and maybe earn a reward from Alabasta, Nami clutched Luffy's shoulders, shaking him frantically. But Luffy shook his head. I don't know Wood personally. I know of him because he was a childhood idol of mine and Ace's. We dreamed of becoming strong enough to defeat him one day. One of the reasons I set out to become a pirate was because of Shanks, but the other was Wood. Hearing this, both Nami and Vivi sank into despair. Nami, at least, hadn't expected much from the start. She'd never heard of this Pluton Wood before. But Vivi had genuinely hoped that, with Wood's help, Alabasta might be saved. Though the Straw Hats had agreed to assist her, Vivi knew their chances of defeating Crocodile were slim at best. If Wood, the infamous former Navy traitor, were willing to step in, then Alabasta would have a fighting chance. In fact, if Wood merely announced that Alabasta was under his protection, Crocodile would likely think twice before making any moves. In the years that had passed since he first appeared, Wood was no longer a newcomer but a major player in the seas. After establishing his weapons factory on the Dark Abyss Island, Wood's company had begun mass-producing advanced weaponry. Initially, selling these weapons had been a challenge, but once Wood made contact with the Golden Emperor Guild Tesoro, the issue of distribution was solved. Guild Tesoro, the man known as the Golden Emperor, was a gold fruit user with the power to manipulate gold, and he controlled the massive entertainment city, Grand Tesoro, along with numerous industries around the world. Tesoro held 20% of the world's wealth and used his immense fortune to influence both the celestial dragons and the world government. In the underworld, he ruled as the king of finance, with his influence spreading across the globe. As for why Guild Tesoro would help Wood and partner with him, the answer was simple. Wood had once saved his life. Guild Tesoro had been a slave to the celestial dragons, along with Boa Hancock and others at Mary Joyce. Though few knew the story of Wood's connection to the fishman swordsman Yasuo, Tesoro somehow learned the truth. When he discovered that Wood was selling new advanced weapons but struggling to find buyers, Tesoro approached him and offered to form a partnership. Thanks to Tesoro's financial backing and Wood's strength, Wood's company grew rapidly, allowing him to become one of the true power players in the underworld. Wood, in his hidden identity as the fishman swordsman Yasuo, had a significant grudge against the world government. But as his influence grew and with the support of people like Tesoro, who even supplied the celestial dragons, the world government had no choice but to accept him. Eventually, they even extended an offer to make Wood one of the 7 warlords of the sea. Chapter 309, Wood's vacation in Alabasta. For someone like Wood, titles such as Warlord of the Sea had long ceased to hold any significance. Even though his bounty remained at a staggering 1 billion Baileys, the Marines had given up trying to capture him. The reason was simple. Wood's influence had grown far beyond what it once was, to the point where he could potentially alter the balance of the world. With the ever-increasing understanding of the Pluton blueprints, the weapons they were manufacturing became more and more advanced. Though they still couldn't rival the genius of Vegapunk, who was said to be 500 years ahead of current technology, their creations were at least 100 to 200 years ahead of their time. More importantly, while Vegapunk's inventions were often difficult to mass-produce, Wood's weapons factory now had a terrifyingly high daily output. Some might argue that Wood's production and mass selling of weaponry were only fueling the fires of war. However, the reality was quite different. While Wood's arms trade hadn't brought about peace, it had in some ways reduced the number of casualties caused by war. In the past, the world operated at a medieval cultural level. Warfare was largely determined by who could field more soldiers. But Wood had single-handedly brought about the shift from brutal melee combat to modern warfare. It was similar to the world Wood came from in his previous life. With nations holding powerful weapons of mass destruction, there was a balance of fear, which often prevented wars from happening at all. Where once wars were fought by sheer numbers, now it was all about whose weapons were more advanced. With one of the latest laser rifles produced by Wood's factory, even an ordinary person could easily take on 100 foes. This change in warfare dynamics led to a decrease in the number of conflicts between kingdoms, many of which had now resorted to bickering and posturing rather than open combat. The reason was simple. These new weapons were so powerful that any large-scale battle would leave both sides decimated, benefiting only their enemies. And with fewer wars breaking out, would that mean Wood's weapons wouldn't sell? Quite the opposite. Each time Wood's factory released a new product, it sold even better than the last. As the saying goes, it's better to be prepared for the worst. In regions where 2 kingdoms were enemies, what would happen if one bought a batch of powerful new weapons? Naturally, the other side would rush to upgrade its arsenal as well. Everyone understood the principle of falling behind means getting beaten. If your enemy has better weapons and you don't upgrade, how could you possibly defeat them? Because of this constant arms race, the kingdoms that had once been engaged in endless warfare were now busy with military upgrades, making open conflict almost impossible. Meanwhile, thanks to this arms race, Wood's weapons business thrived, with profits pouring in from all directions. Nowadays, not only were the kingdoms buying Wood's weapons, but even the world government, the navy, and numerous pirate crews were customers as well. Fleet Admiral Sengoku had never anticipated that the simple task of sending Wood to be a spy would result in him becoming a powerful figure in his own right. Now, the world government's primary directive to the navy regarding Wood was to avoid antagonizing him at all costs. Even if they couldn't recruit him, they needed him to remain neutral. If Wood were to align himself with the Revolutionary Army, his vast influence and advanced weaponry would pose a genuine threat to the world government. In simpler terms, Wood had become the only pirate who, despite not being a warlord, was untouchable by the Navy's bounty system. In this respect, even the so-called 4 emperors couldn't compare. While the 4 emperors had bounties, they were still vulnerable to being pursued by Navy admirals if caught in the open. Wood, on the other hand, wasn't officially recognized as a legal pirate like the warlords of the sea, yet even if he flaunted himself in front of a Navy admiral, they wouldn't dare lay a hand on him. Why? Because if Wood were to die, the underworld would fall into chaos, and kingdoms would break out into wars, throwing the world into turmoil. This instability would give the Revolutionary Army the perfect opportunity to rise, something the world government was desperate to avoid. What the world government didn't know, however, was that Wood had secretly been funding the Revolutionary Army for years and had even risen to the position of armaments minister within their ranks. In other words, Wood's outward identity was that of a former Navy officer with a bounty of 1 billion Baileys, known as the ancient weapon in the underworld. But in truth, he also carried the title of Yasuo, the heroic fishman swordsman, a rear admiral of the Navy, and a high-ranking officer in the Revolutionary Army. Alabasta's coastline, a pirate ship with a flag showing a sword piercing through both a seagull and a skull slowly approached the shore of Alabasta. A group of people who had been waiting for a while rushed forward with a convoy of camels as soon as the ship docked. The fishman sailors aboard the ship casually dropped the anchor and shouted toward the cabin. "Captain, We've arrived in Alabasta. Fishmen rarely ventured onto land. Though they often prided themselves as being superior to humans, the harsh truth was that once on land, they were frequently captured and sold as slaves. Fishmen had always been prized on the slave market and were especially favored by certain depraved nobles, making them valuable commodities for slave traders. However, the bounty hunters who came to collect goods from the ship didn't dare entertain any thoughts of capturing these fishmen. It wasn't because they had any moral qualms, but rather because the fishmen bar the same mark as the pirate flag flying above the ship. This mark belonged to the Nirvana pirates and symbolized that these fishmen were employees of the Dark Abyss Island weapons factory. Attacking these fishmen would be suicidal, as it would mean picking a fight with Wood, the Navy trader. Among those waiting to receive the shipment was Mr. 12, an executive officer of Baroque Works, along with several billionaires and millionaire agents. Though Baroque Works was a bounty hunter organization under Crocodile, it had a formal structure. At the top was Crocodile himself, followed by the chief officers, from Mr. 1 to Mr. 5 and their partners. Below them were the executive officers, ranging from Mr. 6 to Mr. 12 and their partners, a total of 14 people. Mr. 13 and his partner, Miss Friday, known as the Unlucky Duo, served as the organization's enforcers. Below the executives were the 200 billionaires. The next in line for promotion to executive officers. Then came the 1800 millionaires. The regular members of Baroque Works. Of course, there were even more unranked members at the very bottom, the grunts. Crocodile had carefully planned for years, and now, believing the time was ripe, he was ready to make his move against the Kingdom of Alabasta. Though Crocodile's forces were large and the Kingdom of Alabasta didn't have any notable warriors, it was still a significant nation. To ensure success, Crocodile had spent a fortune buying advanced weapons from Wood to arm his millionaires. Today was the agreed-upon day for the transaction, which was why the members of Baroque Works were waiting for the Nirvana pirates to deliver the goods. It was supposed to be a simple exchange, but when Mr. 12 heard the fishmen shout "Captain" and saw a particular figure appear, his jaw nearly dropped to the floor. Baroque Works was made up of former bounty hunters, and these people dealt with bounty posters every day. Naturally, they were well versed in the identities of wanted pirates. The reason Mr. 12 was so shocked was that the figure stepping off the deck was someone he never expected to see here. After carefully examining the person multiple times, Mr. 12 was certain he hadn't made a mistake. This was none other than Wood, the Navy trader with a 1 billion Bailey bounty, a man known by the terrifying moniker of the Ancient Weapon. Although the world government had abandoned its attempts to hunt him down, Wood's bounty posters still circulated across the seas, and his appearance hadn't changed much in the past 10 years. After all, when Wood first debuted as a pirate, he hadn't even been 20 years old. Now, more than 10 years later, he was in his early 30s. Just entering the prime of his life. What puzzled Mr. 12 the most was why someone as significant as Wood, a traitor to the Navy, would show up in such a remote place. Sure, their order from Dark Abyss Island wasn't insignificant, but for someone whose business spanned the entire sea, this should have been a trivial deal. For an order of this size, sending a lieutenant from the Nirvana pirates would have been more than enough to show them respect. But now, the boss of Dark Abyss Island himself had shown up. "Pa. This place is one of the worst islands I've ever landed on. I haven't even been here a minute, and I've already got a mouthful of sand." Wood spat out some sand, his tone annoyed. Behind him, a tall figure with a perfect figure descended from a staircase she had made with her abilities and calmly responded. "Alabasta is a desert kingdom. More than half of this island is covered in desert terrain. The harsh environment and extreme heat are normal here. I don't understand what possessed someone to decide this would be a good vacation spot." The tall figure who had just stepped down was none other than Nico Robin, the Devil Child. More than a decade had passed since the time Wood had rescued Robin, and she had since transformed from the young girl into a stunning, mature woman. Having escaped the life of a fugitive early on, Robin had shed the darker, more ruthless image she might have developed in the original timeline and had instead grown into a fair-skinned, beautiful woman. Not only had she left behind her old life of being constantly hunted, but as Wood's weapons business had grown, Robin's status had risen as well. Now, in the eyes of many, she was considered one of the major players on the seas. "So, as I said before, I'm just here to relax. You didn't need to come along." Wood sighed, looking at Robin, who was already donning sunglasses and a sunshade cloak. "You're our chief financial officer now, overseeing the company's finances and operations. If something happens at the base, who's going to handle it?" Wood had come to Alabasta to watch things play out and to destroy the poneglyph that contained information about Pluton. The reason was simple: Wood's business thrived on a technological monopoly. If Pluton were to surface, his business might no longer hold the same exclusive advantage. Though Wood doubted Crocodile would ever succeed in obtaining Pluton, Especially with someone like Luffy around, he couldn't take any chances. While deciphering the poneglyph required someone like Robin, destroying it did not. Thus, Wood had originally planned to come to Alabasta alone. But somehow, word of his trip had leaked. Once Robin heard that Wood was going to Alabasta for a vacation, she had insisted on coming along. The company is running smoothly. Even without me, Uncle Ruth can handle things just fine. Robin replied, her tone casual. Besides, as the owner, you're taking a vacation, so why should your secretary be stuck working endlessly? The reason Robin had insisted on coming was simple. She had decided to take this opportunity to finally win Wood's heart. Ever since Wood had saved her years ago, Robin had developed feelings of admiration for him, and over time, these feelings had only deepened. For over a decade, she had been Wood's secretary. But unlike other secretary situations, where there was often more going on, Wood had never once made a move on her. In the beginning, Robin had thought it was because she was too young and didn't possess enough charm. After all, she had met Rear Admiral Diane, who was not only incredibly beautiful but also well endowed. As a teenager, Robin couldn't compete with someone like Diane. But as the years went by, Robin had grown from a young girl into a fully matured woman, and yet Wood remained indifferent. This, more than anything, frustrated her. Chapter 310, Ace. Don't challenge Wood without enough strength. Over the years, Robin had put in a great deal of effort to win Wood's affection. In terms of looks, figure, and various other qualities, Robin considered herself highly competitive among the women Wood knew. Yet, despite this, after more than 10 years and numerous attempts to offer herself to him, she had been repeatedly rejected, leaving her feeling defeated. At one point, Robin even began to wonder if Wood might have some issues. Subtly, she had even suggested taking a vacation to the medical nation of Drum Island. However, during an accidental discovery, Robin found out that Wood didn't have any issues at all. It was simply that he had no romantic interest in her. As Wood's personal secretary, Robin usually accompanied him everywhere. But one time, when the factory's translation work reached a critical point, Uncle Ruth went with Wood on a business trip instead to avoid delays in production. It was only later that Robin learned Wood and Ruth had gone to meet none other than the Golden Emperor, Gil Tesoro. As the richest man on the seas, Tesoro had even built the world's largest entertainment city, and naturally, he would spare no expense to welcome an old benefactor like Wood. Following that trip, Ruth would often boast to the crew about how amazing Tesoro's Golden City was. Not only was it a paradise of debauchery, but the number of beautiful women in the entertainment district was unmatched. Ruth proudly claimed he had been able to handle 3 dancers in one night. But even Ruth admitted that compared to their young and vigorous captain, Wood, who had handled a full 10 dancers, his performance paled in comparison. When Robin heard this, she was furious. Knowing that Wood wasn't lacking in capability but was choosing to entertain himself with random women rather than her made her lose her temper entirely. Eventually, after some intense interrogation, Ruth spilled the truth. He confessed that there hadn't been 10 women. Only 3, and that even Wood had only been with 3, not 10 as the rumors said. But the point wasn't the numbers. What truly mattered was that Robin now knew Wood was perfectly fine in that regard, perhaps even more capable than most. Realizing that waiting around would get her nowhere, Robin, who had waited from her teenage years to nearly 30, decided to take action. She wasn't going to wait any longer until she turned from a ripe peach into a spoiled one. Thus, after some serious thought, Robin resolved to make her move and find an opportunity to seize the initiative. Wood's daily life was rather leisurely. He had no intention of working, so when he wasn't training, he was just lazing around at home, making it difficult for Robin to find the right moment. However, this time, Wood had surprisingly announced he was going on a vacation. Even though his choice of Alabasta, a desolate desert kingdom, was odd, Robin wasn't going to let this opportunity slip by. After verifying the weapons shipment, the members of Baroque Works paid the bill promptly. Although their boss was one of the 7 warlords of the sea, they dared not shortchange a powerful underworld figure like Wood. Especially since he was right there in front of them. None of them had the courage for that. Yet, after the transaction was completed, Mr. 12 was shocked to see that Wood and Robin had no intention of leaving. A sense of panic crept over him. Although he dismissed the idea that Wood was planning to rob them, having such a powerful figure lingering around made Mr. 12's heart race with anxiety. "Is there a problem with the payment, Lord Wood?" Mr. 12 nervously asked, his unease growing as Wood and Robin continued to follow them. "No, there's no problem. In fact, your boss was quite generous, even paying 5% above the asking price for our weapons," Wood replied calmly. The weapons from Wood's factory were in such high demand that immediate purchases were impossible. Typically, orders had to be placed and delivered later. But since Crocodile planned to turn on the Alabasta royal family soon, he had paid extra to secure a stockpile from Wood's current inventory. So, If the payment is fine, why are you both still following us? Mr. 12 asked, his unease palpable. Once the payment had been confirmed, the rest of the crew had returned to the ship and left. Robin didn't want anyone interfering with her private vacation with Wood, and besides, Alabasta's harsh desert environment was pure hell for the fishmen. That's a strange question, Wood remarked with a smirk. Even if Crocodile does manage to conquer Alabasta, do you think he could stop me from stepping foot on this island? We're new here, and if we get lost in the desert, we might not make it to the nearest town. So, of course, we'll follow you until we're somewhere more familiar. With Wood's statement, Mr. 12 couldn't argue. Even if he had objections, what could he do? Wood was far too powerful. Arms cannot twist against legs, and in front of Wood, these men were more like fingers at best. Not even arms. Wood, I still don't understand. Robin interjected. Alabasta does have a unique landscape, but there are so many more beautiful places in the New World. Why did you choose to vacation here? As Robin looked around at the scorching heat and endless sand, she truly couldn't understand why Wood had chosen such a barren place. With her intelligence, Robin knew that Wood wasn't really here for a vacation. But she couldn't fathom what Alabasta, a kingdom so poor that it had nothing but sand, could offer him. What do you think of Crocodile? Wood asked, changing the subject. According to our intelligence, Crocodile was one of the more infamous pirates in his early years, though his bounty before becoming a warlord was only 81 million baileys. That low bounty actually highlights his abilities. Though we don't know much about him, Crocodile is known to be highly ambitious and cunning. Compared to pirates who rely solely on brute strength, he's much more dangerous. Robin replied thoughtfully. Not everyone could become one of the 7 warlords of the sea, and their strength wasn't determined by their former bounties. For instance, the pirate Empress Boa Hancock had a bounty of only 80 million baileys when she became a warlord, yet no one would call her weak. As the Queen of Amazon Lily, a user of the love fruit, and a master of all 3 types of hockey, Hancock was undeniably one of the strongest warlords. In fact, the lower a pirate's bounty when they became a warlord, the more the world government viewed them as a significant threat with immense potential. The warlords existed to balance the power of the 4 emperors and to deter other pirates. The government wouldn't pick just anyone for the role. Countless pirates had higher bounties than Crocodile and Hancock, yet it was these 2 who became warlords. Why? Because they had both strength and strategy. If you believe Crocodile to be both ambitious and highly capable, then why do you think he chose Alabasta? Wood continued. With his strength and resources, he could have set his sights on any kingdom in the first half of the Grand Line. So why would he choose a barren place like Alabasta? Wood asked. Wood and Robin's conversation wasn't particularly quiet, and Mr. 12 and the others listened anxiously from the side. These lower-ranked members had only recently learned that Crocodile was their true boss, and now, they were overhearing yet another shocking secret. Mr. 12 and the others were scared out of their wits, but their curiosity overpowered their fear. They, too, wanted to know what Crocodile, one of the 7 warlords, had found in this desert kingdom. Just as they strained their ears to listen, however, Wood stopped speaking, and Robin didn't press the matter further. With a guide to lead them and Alabasta's famous fast-running ducks for transportation, Wood and Robin quickly arrived at a town, parting ways with Mr. 12's group. As they watched Wood and Robin fade into the distance, Mr. 12 knew he had to report Wood's arrival on the island to Crocodile immediately. Meanwhile, after several twists and turns, the Straw Hat Pirates had passed through Little Garden and Drum Island, replenished their supplies, and recruited the adorable reindeer doctor, Chopper. Now, they, too, were making landfall in another part of Alabasta. Upon arriving in Alabasta, Luffy happened to run into his sworn brother, Portgas D. Ace. Ace, who had set sail 2 years before Luffy, had once shared the same dream of becoming the Pirate King. However, he had since become the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. Seeing each other again after so long, the 2 brothers naturally chatted at length. During their conversation, Ace took the opportunity to warn Luffy, don't even think about challenging the powerful figures of the sea, like the trader would, until you've become strong enough. Once upon a time, Ace had been just like Luffy, brimming with overconfidence and arrogance. However, the Spade Pirates that Ace had formed after setting sail hadn't lasted long before they ran into one of the strongest pirate crews on the seas. The Whitebeard Pirates. As expected, the then-rookie Ace was no match for Whitebeard, and after getting thoroughly beaten, Ace was won over by Whitebeard's strength and charisma, eventually becoming the 2nd Division commander. Back when Ace and Luffy were still in Windmill Village, they both believed they would one day defeat all the formidable enemies of the sea and find the legendary One Piece. But after venturing out into the world, Ace realized that the world was far larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. As his experiences grew, Ace came to understand that those who had already made a name for themselves were anything but ordinary. Though Ace didn't believe Wood could defeat Whitebeard, he did acknowledge that the Navy trader was one of the most powerful figures on the seas. In fact, Ace had once heard Marco mention that Wood had almost joined the Whitebeard pirates himself, but red-haired Shanks had managed to recruit him first. Because of that, when Whitebeard took a liking to Ace, he didn't hesitate to act swiftly, not wanting to miss the opportunity. "Is Wood really as strong as Grandpa said? Even you can't beat him?" Luffy asked through mouthfuls of grilled desert crab as they traveled through the desert. "He is incredibly strong, even stronger than Grandpa said. Although I haven't fought him myself, my current captain has met him. All I can say is that I'm nowhere near his level right now." "Neither are you, Luffy," Ace replied with a somber expression. A few years of pirate life had knocked much of the arrogance out of Ace. He now feared that Luffy, not knowing his limits, would challenge enemies beyond his strength and lose his life as a result. After all, not every strong pirate was like Whitebeard, who spared his challengers and even took them in as sons. Ace had come to Alabasta in pursuit of the traitor Blackbeard, and after passing through the desert, he parted ways with Luffy and his crew. "Luffy, is your brother strong? Why don't we recruit him to help us take down Crocodile, and we can help him find that traitor in his pirate crew?" Nami suggested. Though she hadn't known Ace long, Nami already found him to be far more reliable than her idiotic captain, the directionally challenged swordsman, and the perverted cook. While Nami had confidence in the Straw Hats combat trio, they were still up against one of the 7 warlords, Crocodile, and Vivi had mentioned that Baroque Orcs had thousands of members. Just a few of them couldn't possibly sway the entire situation. "Ace is really strong since I've never been able to beat him," Luffy admitted. "But this is our crew's mission. We promised Vivi that we'd help her, so I won't let Ace get involved." Chapter 311, The Gamble with Crocodile. Alabasta, Rain Base. For the past 3 years, Alabasta had not seen a single drop of rain, leading to unrest and turmoil throughout the kingdom. However, Rain Base remained the kingdom's city of dreams because it was the base of Crocodile, one of the 7 warlords of the sea. It was the only city untouched by the drought and unrest that plagued the rest of the nation. The largest casino in the kingdom, Rain Dinners, was located here. For the past 3 years, Crocodile had used his devil fruit ability to cause sandstorms, plunging Alabasta into a state of perpetual drought. He further manipulated the people into believing that their king had secretly used dance powder, a rain-inducing agent, to monopolize rainfall. This deception had sparked a civil war, providing Crocodile with the perfect opportunity to seize control of the kingdom amidst the chaos. Crocodile had been scheming for years, carefully crafting a hero image for himself to better integrate into the nation. But why hadn't he simply conquered the country with brute force? The answer was simple. Alabasta was a major power in the first half of the Grand Line and an ally of the world government, meaning it was under their protection. Crocodile, being a warlord of the sea recognized by the world government, couldn't openly target Alabasta without consequences. To further his plans, Crocodile couldn't afford to lose his warlord status just yet, so he had devised a long-term strategy to conquer the kingdom from within. With the civil war nearing the capital, Crocodile should have been in a celebratory mood, but today, the arrival of 2 unexpected visitors at Rain Dinners completely ruined his day. Wood, the Navy trader with a bounty of 1 billion Baileys. Even the world government couldn't capture you and gave up the chase. "You're a man who dominates both the underworld and the legal world, so what brings you here today?" Crocodile asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. Rain Dinners, Alabasta's largest casino, was not only Crocodile's base of operations but also his personal money-making machine. However, today, the other guests had been cleared out. Crocodile sat at a grand gambling table, a cigar in his mouth, polishing the golden hook on his hand while casting a wary gaze at Wood, who sat opposite him. Several days earlier, Mr. 12 had reported that Wood had landed in Alabasta, but Crocodile hadn't paid much attention at the time. After all, while Alabasta was a powerful kingdom in the first half of the Grand Line, it wasn't particularly wealthy. Certainly not enough to attract a figure like Wood. Yet, here Wood was, in Rain Base, having gone straight to Crocodile's base of operations. This could only mean one thing: trouble. Although Crocodile was older than Wood, Wood's reputation had been established much earlier. Even Crocodile's title as a warlord of the sea didn't hold much weight in Wood's presence. "Relax. I'm not interested in Alabasta. I'm not here to steal this desert kingdom from you," Wood said with a smirk. "There's a war brewing here, and as you know, I deal in weapons. I'm just here for business." Wood leaned back in his chair, casually glancing around the casino. "I heard this place has the largest casino, so I figured I'd gamble a bit. Who would have thought it was your turf?" Despite Wood's calm words, Crocodile remained on edge. Not a single word Wood said could be trusted. It was true that Alabasta's impending war would benefit someone like Wood, who thrived in the underworld as a renowned arms dealer. But Crocodile didn't believe for a second that Wood had come all the way to this barren desert just to make a few extra Baileys. Enough with the nonsense. What do you want? If it's money, take whatever you can from this casino. I just need you to leave Alabasta and stop interfering with my plans. Crocodile said, his irritation barely masked. Facing someone as powerful as Wood, Crocodile had no choice. His only hope was that Wood would take the money and leave so that his carefully laid plans for Alabasta wouldn't be jeopardized. What if what I want is the ancient weapon Pluton? Wood asked with a sly grin. Crack. The moment Wood finished speaking, Crocodile's hand turned to sand, and in an instant, he swung it toward Wood. A massive sand blade formed in midair and, with incredible speed, sliced the long gambling table in half. The terrifying power of the sand blade didn't just split the table, it also left a deep gash in the hard stone floor beneath it, as though the ground had been struck by a razor-sharp sword. But Wood had anticipated Crocodile's outburst. Calmly, he raised his hand, and a metallic black sheen quickly spread over his fist. With a loud, resounding crack, Wood punched the air, and the sand blade shattered into dust. The force of the punch sent the pulverized sand scattering like bullets in all directions. The exploding sand had the force of a shotgun blast, turning the once lavish casino into a chaotic mess, riddled with holes. Naturally, the sand bullets weren't only aimed at Wood but also at Robin and Crocodile. However, for Crocodile, who had eaten a Logia-type devil fruit, the sand posed no threat. As the bullets struck him, his body simply turned to sand, leaving him unharmed. This was the power of Logia fruits, which allowed users to turn their bodies into natural elements. Unless struck by hockey or sea stone, even if their bodies were torn to pieces, they would remain unharmed. Captain, you could have handled that attack in a much more restrained way, Robin said with a sigh. Sure, hockey is effective against Logia users, but did you consider how the rest of us feel? Having been caught in the sandstorm-like explosion, Robin had easily shielded herself with her own hockey, emerging unscathed. Thanks to years of training under Wood, she had mastered both observation and armament hockey, becoming a formidable fighter in her own right. Where did you hear about Pluton? Crocodile asked, his eyes narrowing dangerously. I've been planning my takeover of Alabasta for 3 years. I won't back down just because you're a powerful arms dealer. Even if I have to go down fighting, I'll spread the word that Alabasta is hiding Pluton. I'm sure the major powers of the New World and the world government would be very interested. Crocodile was visibly rattled by the knowledge that not only Wood, but also Robin, could wield armament hockey so skillfully. He had heard rumors of Wood's strength, that he was on par with a Navy Vice Admiral, and that his past opponents had either been legendary pirates or future admirals. After more than a decade, Crocodile couldn't believe that Wood had grown weaker. With no other options, Crocodile was prepared to go down swinging, even if it meant exposing Alabasta's secret. If I can't have Pluton, I won't let you have it either, Crocodile declared, his voice filled with bitterness. Wood chuckled. I think you're overthinking things. I'm not particularly interested in Pluton. Do you really think that with my power and influence, I need an ancient weapon like that? People already call me a living ancient weapon. Whether I get Pluton or not makes no difference to me. Hearing this, Crocodile's anger subsided, and he began to think more rationally. Wood's words made sense. Given his power, Wood didn't need an ancient weapon to dominate the seas. And if Wood truly wanted Pluton, he wouldn't be discussing it openly with him. So, what do you want, then? Crocodile asked, his tone slightly calmer. Are you saying there's something else in Alabasta besides Pluton that interests you? Wood grinned. I really did come here just for a vacation. But if you're so sure I'm after Pluton, I guess there's nothing I can do to change your mind. Still, even if I don't get involved, I bet you won't be able to claim Pluton for yourself. Care to wager on it? Crocodile scoffed. You think anyone else here could be a threat to me? Aside from you and your crew, who could possibly stand in my way? It was true that Wood could interfere if he wanted to, but Crocodile was confident that no one else in Alabasta could pose a threat to him. Since we're in a casino, how about a little gamble? Wood proposed. I'll stay out of the fight for Alabasta and Pluton, but I'm betting that you'll lose to the Straw Hat Pirates. You may find the ruins that contain Pluton's location, but can you read them? If you win this wager, I'll have my assistant translate the poneglyph for you. Don't forget, she's Nico Robin, the demon child. There aren't many people left in the world who can read the ancient texts. Wood's proposal gave Crocodile pause. He had planned to find the poneglyph and split it into pieces, sending it to various black markets for translation. That way, the location of Pluton would remain a secret, while he worked to uncover its location. However, Crocodile wasn't sure if the black market could reliably translate the ancient text. Nico Robin, the last survivor of O'Hara, could certainly make the process much easier. And I can also deal with the Navy presence here if you win, Wood added. You know I have the connections to make that happen. Crocodile, deeply tempted by the offer, began to seriously consider the gamble. Having Robin's help would save him a lot of trouble, and if Wood could handle the Navy, his plans would proceed smoothly. Chapter 312, Robin doesn't want to just be a little sister, so, if I lose the bet, what is it you want to take from me? In any bet, both sides need to wager something of value. Crocodile couldn't believe Wood would make such a favorable offer without asking for something in return. Of course, Crocodile didn't think for a second that he'd lose. This so-called Straw Hat Pirates. He'd barely even heard of them until recently. It was only from reports that Crocodile's subordinates had brought to him that he even became aware of this no-name pirate crew. A pirate crew not even a year old, with only 5 or 6 members, most of whom came from the weakest sea, the East Blue. Their captain was a mere kid with a bounty of just 30 million Baileys. There was no way Crocodile believed he could lose to such small fry. If you lose, you'll probably lose everything, won't you? Not only will you be stripped of your warlord title, but you'll likely be thrown into Impel Down as well. In that case, all of your amassed wealth will be confiscated and wasted. So, why not hand it over to me instead? Oh, and when you end up in Impel Down, I'd like to ask you to do something for me as well. After the conversation ended, Wood and Nico Robin left Rain Dinners and began leisurely wandering through Rainbase, as if they really were just tourists. As she watched Wood casually stroll through the streets, Robin couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. How did you know that Alabasta had a poneglyph and that it contained information about the ancient weapon Pluton? Logically speaking, over the years, Wood hadn't done much besides his daily training and lazing around. Given that Wood controlled the world's largest arms market and was a major figure in the underworld, gathering intelligence was his forte. However, such intelligence work was typically handled by Robin herself, the all-knowing secretary who analyzed and organized everything. If their organization knew about something, Robin would certainly be aware of it. Yet, Robin had never heard anything about Alabasta possessing a poneglyph. So how had Wood, who normally left everything to others, learned about this? Well, I have my own special sources of information. Don't forget, I'm not just an arms dealer. Wood said with a knowing grin. Robin's eyes lit up with realization. She was aware that Wood had some connections with the Revolutionary Army. Wood had never hidden the fact that he received intelligence and orders from them. The only thing Wood had ever kept from her was information from the Navy. So Robin quickly pieced it together. This intel must have come from the Navy. Usually, when the Navy provided Wood with information, it meant they had assigned him another dangerous mission. And that woman she hated most would likely be involved again. Seeing the look of gritted frustration on Robin's face, Wood sighed deeply. This was precisely why he hadn't told Robin about his dealings with the Navy. It wasn't that Wood didn't trust Robin, but she had her own personal reasons for wanting him to sever ties with the Navy as quickly as possible, which often clouded her judgment. Robin's reasoning was simple. If Wood cut ties with the Navy, he wouldn't leave her one day and return to their ranks. Plus, within the Navy, Robin had a particular rival, Wood's senior apprentice, who not only had a fair complexion and long legs but also held Wood's attention every time they met. Robin was confident in her appearance and her figure, feeling that she was far more attractive and younger. But she had to admit, the other woman's legs were longer. And as a woman, Robin's intuition told her that this female Marine had feelings for Wood as well. Robin had even used her underworld connections to gather intel on her. That's how she learned the woman was a renowned beauty within the Navy and had been proposed to hundreds of times, but she had refused every single one. Why? Did it really need to be said? It was obvious her heart was already set on someone. But even if she had met Wood first, so what? Now, Nico Robin was the most indispensable woman in his life. Whether in business or daily life, Wood had already been trained by Robin for more than a decade. Who else could compare to her? And besides, how much did this other woman even know about Wood's secrets? Certainly not as much as Robin did. In the past, Robin had taken great pride in these advantages, thinking that she was the most competitive candidate and that Wood's trust in her was unmatched. But lately, Robin had begun to realize her thoughts had been too idealistic. Wood did indeed trust her completely, never hiding anything from her when it came to decisions. However, that trust wasn't the kind that came from being lovers. It was the trust between family members. To put it bluntly, Robin felt that Wood didn't see her as a woman. Or at least, not the kind of woman she wanted to be seen as. He treated her more like a sister. Being a sister might be important, but for Robin, it wasn't enough. That's why Robin had decided to take this chance, during their time alone in Alabasta, to try and elevate her relationship with Wood. If necessary, she was even willing to use more unconventional methods, like drugs or something similar. Meanwhile, Wood, who had just won a fortune at Crocodile's casino, was happily handing out money to the local children like a wealthy philanthropist. But suddenly, he felt a chill run down his spine. Elsewhere, after parting ways with Ace and crossing the desert, the Straw Hat Pirates had arrived at Yuba, only to find the oasis town had been reduced to a wasteland, devastated by years of sandstorms. Learning that Yuba's fate had been caused by Crocodile, Luffy accepted a small water supply from an old man named Toto, and vowed to defeat Crocodile and save the kingdom. Crocodile had originally dismissed the Straw Hat Pirates as insignificant, but after his encounter with Wood, he began to take them more seriously and ordered his subordinates to gather more information on them. However, even after learning more, Crocodile still wasn't impressed. To him, the Straw Hats were nothing special. Whether it was Luffy or Zoro, they were just small-time players in his eyes. Though he noted they had defeated Mr. Three's group and survived Little Garden, Crocodile still didn't see them as a real threat. At the same time, in Yuba, Luffy and the others learned that Koza, leader of the rebellion, was preparing to launch a full-scale war against the kingdom's forces. The Straw Hats decided to split up. Since Koza had been a childhood friend of Princess Vivi, and Vivi herself was the princess of Alabasta, she was the perfect person to mediate between the two sides. But the Baroque Works agents weren't about to let Vivi return to the royal capital of Alubarna. After some discussion, the crew decided that Luffy and Zoro, the main combat forces, would head to Rain Base to defeat Crocodile, while Sanji and the others would escort Vivi back to the capital. However, things didn't go as smoothly as they had hoped. Originally, Vivi and Nami planned to disguise themselves as dancers and sneak into the capital of Alubarna. But due to Wood's interference, Crocodile had become much more vigilant than he was in the original story. Although Crocodile still saw the Straw Hat Pirates as small fry, he wasn't about to take any chances that could jeopardize his plans. So unlike in the original timeline, where Vivi and Nami had easily slipped into the capital disguised as dancers, this time, they were intercepted outside the city. And it wasn't just one or two agents waiting for them, but over 100 Baroque Works billionaire agents. Accompanied by nearly 1,000 millionaire agents. Captain, it looks like your bet with Crocodile might not go so well. If Princess Vivi can't defuse the situation between the rebels and the royal army, this kingdom will plunge into civil war. And once that happens, Crocodile will have the upper hand and seize control of Alabasta. From atop the walls of Alubarna, Wood and Robin watched the scene unfold, their cloaks billowing in the wind. Seeing Vivi and the others surrounded, Wood looked slightly surprised, but quickly tried to act calm. Don't worry, they're the main characters. The Baroque Works agents are only about as strong as your average marine. Even without Luffy and Zoro, Sanji can handle them just fine. And don't forget, they've got Usopp, the man who creates miracles, and Nami with her incredible figure. 86, 57, 86. She's the mascot who wins fights with a bounty of only 100 Baileys. Robin wasn't sure she understood half of what Wood was saying, but she couldn't help but notice how familiar Wood seemed to be with the Straw Hat crew. It was one thing for him to know their names, but to know the exact measurements of their female members? That was suspicious. 86, 57, 86. For a girl that young, those were impressive stats. But if Robin compared herself to that, well, she was clearly the winner. Looking down at her own body, even wrapped in a sandproof cloak, Robin could still see her ample curves, her shapely waist, and her perfect hips. With confidence, she turned to Wood and asked, Captain, do you know my measurements? Wood, still watching the battle below, was caught off guard by Robin's sudden question. He was so focused on the Straw Hats that he absent-mindedly replied. Why would I need to know that? I'm not some kind of pervert. Robin's face froze. You're not a pervert, yet you know the exact measurements of Nami from the Straw Hat Pirates, but after more than 10 years of living with me, you don't know anything about mine? Wood had learned Nami's measurements because, back when he was watching the anime, there had been a scene where a certain invisible pervert kidnapped her. Her measurements had been revealed as part of the running gag, and it had stuck in his mind. After giving Robin that careless answer, Wood suddenly felt a dangerous aura behind him. That's when he realized what he had just said. This is totally explainable. You know, I was just guessing. You know how Ruth and the others are always talking about stuff like that. As the captain, I have to join in sometimes to understand my crew. Wood didn't think he really needed to explain, but Robin's current mood seemed extremely dangerous, so he decided to play it safe. Oh, you were just guessing? Well, it seems like you guessed very accurately. I didn't realize our captain had such a special talent. So, why don't you take a guess at my measurements? And if you get it wrong, I think you know what'll happen. Wood's eyes quickly scanned Robin's curves, and he confirmed that, yes, Robin was definitely larger than Nami. But beyond that, he didn't dare say. Well, I'd say you're definitely over 86. I can't be more specific because, well, it's beyond my grasp. Wood's cautious answer didn't seem to satisfy Robin. Just as she was about to press him further, she noticed that the coward had already disappeared. No, more accurately, Wood had darted away and was now standing amidst the Straw Hat Pirates and the Baroque Works agents. And in typical Wood fashion, he had pulled his cloak over his face to hide his identity. Chapter 313. I'm just a handsome merchant passing by under normal circumstances. Even without Luffy and Zoro, Sanji and the remaining crew should have been able to handle Baroque Works underlings without much trouble. After all, Sanji was one of the Straw Hat Pirates' top fighters. Nami had her climax now, so dealing with small fry shouldn't have been an issue. Chopper had some combat ability, and if Usopp used his sneaky style, he could fight well too. Plus, with the main character's plot armor, there was no reason they shouldn't have been able to beat the ordinary Baroque Works grunts. However, the problem lay in the fact that Baroque Works not only had numbers on their side but had also equipped themselves with powerful advanced weapons. Sanji was already struggling against the sheer number of enemies, but now he had to worry about Nami and the others dodging Gatling guns and laser weapons, which only added to his burden, leaving him covered in injuries. Meanwhile, Nami, who was being carried on Chopper's reindeer form, glanced at Vivi and asked with a hint of frustration. Vivi, didn't you say that apart from the high-ranking officers, the rest of Baroque Works are just weaklings? Facing Nami's question, Vivi, sitting on crew the spot-build duckstack, dodged a barrage of gunfire while responding with equal confusion. I don't know what's going on either. When I infiltrated Baroque Works with Igaram, we figured out most of their capabilities. Even with our skills, we managed to rise to the ranks of Mr. 8 and Ms. Monday. The billionaires and millionaires of Baroque Works were honestly not as strong as the kingdom's army. I have no idea where they got these high-powered weapons from. Vivi wore a troubled expression. The fighting power of Baroque Works was far beyond what she had anticipated. If things continued like this, Alabasta would inevitably fall into Crocodile's hands. In her moment of distraction, a stray bullet grazed Vivi's shoulder, causing her to fall off crew. Sanji and Nami tried to rush to her aid, but even at their fastest, they couldn't outrun the laser weapons in the hands of Baroque Works' billionaire agents. As the lasers fired toward Vivi, who lay helpless on the ground, she closed her eyes in fear. Truth be told, Vivi wasn't afraid of danger or death. Otherwise, she wouldn't have spent 2 years undercover in Baroque Works. What scared her more was the fate of her people, the imminent battle between the kingdom's army and the rebel forces. Boom! A massive explosion rang out as the laser hit the ground. But when Vivi opened her eyes again, she found herself unharmed. Standing in front of her was a tall figure clad in a black coat, shielding her from the blast. Apparently, this person had saved her. That guy. He just deflected a laser cannon shot with his bare hands. Are you kidding me? This is one of the latest weapons developed on Dark Island. It's said to be powerful enough to sink a small ship in one shot, exclaimed the billionaire agent wielding the laser cannon. He stared at his weapon in disbelief. He had been obsessed with this weapon ever since he got his hands on it, confirming its immense power through countless tests. The huge crater left in the ground from the laser's impact was proof enough of the weapon's destructive force. Yet this man had just deflected that same laser with his bare hand? Forget about who this guy is. With these powerful weapons, we can take down anyone. Even the top officers of Baroque Works wouldn't stand a chance. The boss wants us to eliminate Princess Vivi. If we take her out, we'll be heroes. Though they didn't know who it was, the advanced weapons in their hands gave the Baroque Works agents plenty of confidence. Even if their opponent was a Marine captain, they believed they were more than a match for him. In no time, hundreds of Baroque Works members aimed their weapons at Wood and Vivi. Sanji and Nami desperately wanted to tell Wood to run, but with the sheer number of enemies surrounding them, there was nowhere for him and Vivi to escape. I don't know who you are, but I'm sorry. Because you saved me, you might end up dying here with me, Vivi said. Despite being only 16 years old, she didn't feel fear in the face of death. Instead, her first thought was guilt. Guilt that her rescuer might lose his life because of her. Wood couldn't help but feel his decision to save her was the right one. It's too early to give up. It's not over yet. Don't you want to save your kingdom? Wood replied. As his words fell, a barrage of bullets and laser fire rained down on them. Unable to bear witnessing the grim scene, Nami and Chopper shut their eyes tightly, while Sanji and Usopp wore expressions of fury and despair. But in the next instant, the temperature around them soared, and a towering wall of fire, several meters high, rose from the ground, completely encircling Wood and Vivi, blocking every attack from all directions. Bullets and lasers disappeared into the flames as if swallowed whole. The fire had risen quickly, and just as quickly, it dissipated. As everyone stood there, stunned by what had just happened, they saw Wood standing still, conjuring a ball of water in his hand. The ball of water floated above his palm, quickly shaping itself into a blade of water. Wood gripped the water blade and made several sweeping motions, causing ripples to cascade through the air. In the aftermath of these invisible waves, the wind around them suddenly calmed. The Baroque Orcs agents who had been facing Wood moments ago had all felt the sharp sword energy brush past them, leaving them drenched in cold sweat. When the air finally stilled, they checked their bodies and found that they were completely unharmed. I thought he was supposed to be some big shot, but it looks like he's just trying to scare us. Thud. 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 Before the words were even out of their mouths, they realized that their weapons had grown strangely light. They looked down and saw that their laser cannons had been cleanly sliced in two. Dark Island's weapons were crafted from the finest steel, and even an expert swordsman would struggle to cut through them. Yet these Baroque Orcs agents were shocked to find that their beloved weapons had been sliced in half as if they were made of tofu. And it wasn't just one or two of them. Every single one of the thousands of Baroque Orcs agents had their weapons cut cleanly in two. One half remained in their hands, while the other half lay on the ground. Monster. This guy is a real monster. Why didn't the mission briefing mention someone like him? The agents panicked. In an instant, this man had cut through all their steel weapons. They had no doubt that he could do the same to their flesh and bones. If he could cut through steel so effortlessly, slicing through their bodies would be even easier. Did they have any chance to resist or escape? The answer was no. None of them had even seen Wood draw his blade, and despite the distance between them, he had cut through their weapons as if they were nothing. They realized that even if they tried to run, they wouldn't stand a chance against someone of his caliber. Wood remained standing in place, still gripping the water blade. His presence was so intimidating that it was unbearable. Finally, one of the Baroque Orcs agents couldn't handle the pressure anymore and made a break for it. As soon as the first person fled, a chain reaction followed, and the rest of the Baroque Orcs agents scattered, fleeing in all directions. Vivi, you should have told us you knew someone this powerful from the start. Nami teased. Yeah. If we had known we had such a strong backup, we wouldn't have had to run around like scared mice. Usopp chimed in. They're lucky they ran, or else I'd have called in my 8,000-man army and taken them down. Wow. We have 8,000 backup soldiers. Usopp, you're amazing. Chopper exclaimed. With the crisis averted and a new, clearly formidable ally on their side, Nami and the others started joking around with Vivi. But to everyone's surprise, Vivi stared at them in confusion and said, Wait, isn't his guy one of your friends? After a brief moment of mutual bewilderment, Nami, Vivi, and the others turned their gazes to Wood, while Sanji narrowed his eyes, watching him warily. Sanji's caution wasn't out of hostility, but rather because Wood's presence felt dangerous. Unlike Nami, Usopp, and Chopper, Sanji immediately sensed an overwhelming pressure from Wood as soon as he saw him. His skin tingled, and every instinct screamed at him that the man before them was someone to be feared. The only other person Sanji had ever felt this way about was Dracul Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman. Although Sanji hadn't fought Mihawk directly, he had felt that same sense of overwhelming power when Mihawk's sharp gaze fell upon him. Though Wood had saved them and hadn't harmed any of the fleeing Baroque Orcs agents, Sanji remained on high alert. The man before him was far too dangerous to let his guard down. I'm not your enemy, so there's no need to be so wary of me. Wood said calmly. Besides, if I truly wanted to harm you, do you think you'd be able to stop me? Despite saving Vivi and the others, Wood hadn't killed any of Crocodile's men. The reason Crocodile had paid so much attention to the Straw Hat Pirates, compared to the original timeline, was due to his bet with Wood. Since Wood had saved them but hadn't killed Crocodile's men, he figured he hadn't technically broken their agreement. Wood reasoned with himself, convincing himself that his actions didn't violate the terms of the bet. As he pondered his own logic, Vivi approached him, clutching her injured shoulder, and bowed in gratitude. Thank you for saving us. May I ask your name? Are you someone I know? Although the man had saved them, Vivi felt it would be rude not to thank him. She was also incredibly curious about who he was and why he had helped them. From his voice and build, Vivi was fairly certain she didn't know him. After all, if someone this powerful had been connected to her family, she would have remembered. My name isn't important. You can think of me as a distant relative of the Nefertari family or as just a handsome merchant passing by. Either way, I'm not with Crocodile's group, but don't expect me to help you any further. Saving you just now already violated the terms of my agreement, so don't think I'll be helping you take down Crocodile or anything like that. One more thing. Crocodile is a Logia-type user of the sand fruit. The drought in Alabasta is his doing, and his weakness is water. Chapter 314, Ace, how dare you hit my brother? When Vivi and the others heard Wood's words, they were about to ask more questions. However, before they could, they realized that Wood had already vanished from their sight. As Wood disappeared, Sanji finally breathed a sigh of relief. Although the man had shown no hostility towards them, His overwhelming aura was still too much pressure for them to bear at this stage. What a mysterious guy. He runs so fast. I was going to try and negotiate with him, offer him a share of the reward if he helped us defeat Crocodile. But before I could even say anything, he was already gone. Nami said, a look of regret on her face. After witnessing the scene just now, Nami realized that it was a bit too ambitious for their crew to take on the billion Bailey's bounty by themselves. After seeing Wood's incredible combat power, she had intended to hire him as a bodyguard for 10% of the reward. But before she could finish her offer, he had already vanished. Don't underestimate that 10%. For someone as money-obsessed as Nami, being willing to offer up 100 million Baileys was already a clear acknowledgement of Wood's strength. I don't think that guy is the type who would act for just 100 million Baileys, Sanji said, lighting a cigarette. If he were a pirate, his bounty would definitely be far above that amount. A bounty over 100 million Baileys? Luffy's bounty is only 30 million Baileys, and Crocodile's is about 81 million, right? Does that mean this guy is even stronger than Luffy and Crocodile? Nami and Chopper, who had previously only been in the East Blue, judged a pirate's strength based solely on the value of their bounty. Because they had seen so few powerful people, to them, Luffy and Zoro were already monstrous in strength. I've never met Crocodile, so I can't say for sure. But if it's that guy we just saw, even if Luffy, Zoro, and I fought him together, we wouldn't stand a chance. We might be defeated in an instant. Sanji said honestly, and his words almost scared Nami and the others half to death. Meanwhile, in Alubarna, Wood and Robin walked side by side through the streets, watching as the citizens, incited by the rebel army, picked up weapons to fight the kingdom's army. Wood remained calm. It seems the battle will break out sooner than expected. Even though you broke the rules to save Princess Vivi, Captain, it wasn't enough to prevent this fight. And since it's an internal conflict, the Marines stationed outside the city won't intervene to quell the rebellion. If things continue like this, the rebel army and the kingdom's forces will both suffer heavy losses, and Crocodile will take advantage of the situation to become the new ruler of this kingdom as a so-called hero. It seems you've lost the bet, Captain, Robin remarked. Although Vivi had been saved, Baroque Orcs Mr. 2 had already used his Devil Fruit ability to impersonate King Cobra and shot the rebel leader, Koza, during negotiations. As a result, the kingdom's army and the rebels had clashed, and Alubarna was now engulfed in battle. Not necessarily. If the Straw Hats can defeat Crocodile, there might still be a way to turn things around. The drought in Alabasta was caused by Crocodile's Devil Fruit powers. If we want to end this conflict, maybe all it takes is some long-awaited rain. Crocodile was supposed to be in Rain Base, but now he was in the palace of Alubarna. This meant that Luffy and Zoro, who had gone to Rain Base to stop Crocodile, either missed him or were unable to defeat him. However, Wood had no doubts that Luffy and the others wouldn't die at Crocodile's hands. After all, Luffy was the child of destiny. A protagonist who always survived against the odds. If Luffy were that easy to kill, One Piece wouldn't have been serialized for over a decade. Captain, do you really think the Straw Hat Pirates can defeat Crocodile? Sure, Crocodile may not be the strongest among the 7 warlords of the sea, but he's still a world-recognized pirate with considerable strength and cunning. As for the Straw Hats, they're just rookie pirates. There's no denying that they're different from other pirates, but that's all they are. Crocodile isn't like the pirates they encountered in the East Blue. The difference in their power levels is massive. From Robin's perspective, the Straw Hats had almost no chance of victory. Yet, her captain seemed convinced they would win. In the heart of Alubarna, Crocodile, clad in his heavy coat and chomping on a large cigar, had already taken control of the rebel forces and was now attacking the royal palace. The rebel leader, Koza, was critically wounded by Cobra, who was impersonated by Mr. 2, and lay unconscious. The rebels, furious and leaderless, were now desperate to seek justice from King Cobra, but they lacked someone to guide them. This was when Crocodile's planted agents within the rebels came into play. Coupled with the positive image Crocodile had cultivated over the past few years, he easily took over leadership of the rebels. Originally, Crocodile's plan was to let the kingdom's army and the rebels fight until both sides were weakened, then emerge as the savior to claim control over the nation. But due to the changing situation, Crocodile had no choice but to accelerate his plans and seize control of Alabasta. Half a day ago, while still in Rain Base, Crocodile received unexpected visitors. Luffy and Zoro of the Straw Hat Pirates. Ordinarily, Crocodile wouldn't have considered such small fry worth his time. However, due to his bet with Wood, Crocodile, though still dismissive of Luffy and Zoro, didn't underestimate them too much. After a fierce battle, Luffy and Zoro, who hadn't yet mastered armament hockey, were utterly outmatched against Crocodile's Logia abilities. Their attacks, whether Luffy's punches or Zoro's three-sword style, were completely ineffective against Crocodile. Crocodile easily drained them dry with his sand fruit abilities and even taunted them in classic villain fashion. Unlike the original story, Crocodile had no intention of letting them live. He wanted to eliminate them once and for all. But just as Crocodile was about to deliver the final blow, a blazing pillar of fire suddenly struck his chest, sending him flying back 100 meters. The newcomer was none other than Fire Fist Ace, the topless, cowboy hat-wearing 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. How Ace, who was supposed to be chasing Blackbeard, ended up in Rain Base was anyone's guess. Whether he heard rumors or it was just the protagonist Sora at work, no one knew. But one way or another, Ace had arrived in the nick of time. Ace didn't care about Alabasta's fate or Crocodile's ambitions. His only goal was to capture Blackbeard and bring him back to the Whitebeard Pirates for punishment. However, seeing Crocodile about to kill his brother Luffy, Ace couldn't just stand by. As someone who had grown up with Luffy, Ace could ignore Princess Vivi's plight, but anyone who dared lay a hand on his brother had to deal with him. No wonder he said I'd lose to the Straw Hats. I never expected the famous Fire Fist Ace, 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, to be Luffy's brother. Crocodile sneered. The Whitebeard Pirates were one of the 4 emperors, and Crocodile, who had previously been defeated by Whitebeard, certainly recognized Ace. Fire Fist Ace was a well-known pirate, even in the New World. At that moment, Crocodile finally understood why Wood was so confident and bet against him. Humphrey, so what if you're Fire Fist Ace? You're just a kid riding on Whitebeard's reputation. If the Whitebeard Pirates were here, I'd admit defeat, but since it's just you and that Straw Hat brat are going to die here today. In terms of overall strength, Crocodile at this point was likely no match for Ace. However, both were Logia Devil Fruit users. While the Flame Fruit was indeed powerful, this was the desert kingdom of Alabasta, Crocodile's home turf. With an entire desert at his disposal, Crocodile didn't believe he could lose to anyone. Outside of Rain Base, raging sandstorms clashed with surging flames, the intense heat instantly evaporating the moisture in the air, making the already scorching environment even more unbearable. The temperature of the desert soared by dozens of degrees, with the blistering sand hot enough to cook anything that dared to cross it. No one knew the exact outcome of the battle, but ultimately, Crocodile, his face twisted in anger, left Rain Base for Alubarna, advancing his plans ahead of schedule. It was clear that, even if he hadn't lost outright, he hadn't managed to kill Fire Fist Ace or the Straw Hat Pirates either. Whether Ace's presence in Alabasta was a personal decision or part of a Whitebeard Pirates mission related to the Pluton, Crocodile couldn't tell. But he knew one thing. To prevent his plan from failing, he needed to seize control of Alabasta quickly. For this reason, Crocodile altered his original strategy, taking over the rebels and rapidly defeating the kingdom's army. As one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Crocodile couldn't directly attack Alabasta, a member of the world government. But the rebels were citizens of Alabasta, and he was merely hired to assist them. The kingdom's internal strife and regime change were natural parts of history, and even the world government couldn't find fault with that. Many of Baroque Orc's agents disguised themselves as rebels, and with Crocodile providing new weapons to the original rebel forces, the tide of battle quickly turned. The rebels, previously suppressed by the kingdom's army, now pushed forward relentlessly, advancing all the way to the palace. Alabasta's 2 commanding officers, Pel the Falcon and Chaka the Jackal. Both wielded Zone Devil Fruit powers, but they couldn't withstand even a single blow from Crocodile. As the palace fell, and King Cobra was held up like a helpless chick by Crocodile, the Straw Hats arrived with Vivi, seemingly out of nowhere. Flame Commandment. A massive wall of fire rose from the ground, instantly separating the kingdom's forces from the rebels. The towering flames, stretching for hundreds of meters, were so intimidating that both sides stopped fighting. Taking advantage of this moment, Vivi stood before both the kingdom's forces and the rebels, exposing all of Crocodile's and Baroque Orc's crimes, including the use of dance powder. As Alabasta's beloved princess, Vivi's words held weight. Her plea began to sway some of the citizens. Ridiculous. Have you all forgotten who attacked your leader? And look at who Princess Vivi is with. Pirates. Can you really trust the words of a princess who associates with pirates? Have you forgotten who drove off the pirates who once tried to invade this island? Seeing his plan on the brink of failure, Crocodile wasn't willing to give up and naturally denied everything Vivi said. With both sides presenting seemingly valid arguments, the rebels hesitated, unsure of whom to believe. But among those present, there were always those who acted out of turn. The Straw Hats weren't citizens of Alabasta, and they didn't care whether Crocodile was the kingdom's hero or a warlord of the sea. For a pirate who lived for freedom, if they didn't like someone, they'd just fight them. So Luffy, carrying a large water barrel, simply stepped forward, bypassed everyone, and launched a gum punch straight at Crocodile's head. Chapter 315, Ace vs. Robin. Crocodile couldn't turn into sand this time because his body was drenched with water beforehand. As a result, Luffy's punch sent him flying hundreds of meters away. Ace, seeing Luffy chase after Crocodile, grew concerned for his brother and was about to follow, but someone blocked his path. The demon child, Nico Robin. So, it turns out that the one backing Crocodile is your Dark Abyss Island Weapon Company. Standing before Fire Fist Ace was none other than Wood's best secretary, Robin. As Dark Abyss Island's weapon company grew larger, Robin's face had become more and more recognized across the seas. After all, she was the second in command of the Dark Abyss Island Weapon Company and one of the most formidable women in the world. Don't misunderstand. Our weapon company has no direct ties to Crocodile. At most, we have a simple business relationship. However, because our captain has made a bet with Crocodile, only the Straw Hat Pirates can defeat him. So as the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, Fire Fist Ace, I can't let you interfere. Robin, the user of the flower fruit, had the power to replicate her body parts in any location. Her techniques mostly revolved around joint locking moves, but this put her at a disadvantage against Logia users, especially someone like Ace, a flame fruit user. Any replicated body parts still maintained a connection to Robin, much like how some devil fruit abilities directly affected their user's body. This meant that if Robin tried to grab Ace, and he turned into fire, her replicated limbs would be burned, and she would feel the pain. At first glance, the flower fruit might seem rather weak, with such an obvious weakness. However, the reality was the exact opposite. Because her replicated body parts were linked to her main body, the fruit held even greater potential. Since the limbs shared the same sensory feedback, Robin could also infuse them with her own strength, including armament hockey. Solar Flame. Worried that Luffy might not be able to defeat Crocodile, Ace no longer cared about what Robin had to say. His arm turned into flames, forming a pillar of fire that shot from his palm and engulfed Robin's figure in an instant. Blooming Chaos, Phantom Wings. As the flames shot toward her, several petals floated through the air, and countless arms sprouted from Robin's back, forming 2 massive wings. These wings closed around her, shielding her body. The moment her wings closed, they were covered in armament hockey, making them as hard as black iron. When Ace's flames collided with the wings, they split like a river crashing against rocks, unable to penetrate her defense. As Robin spread her wings again, the intense flames scattered, breaking apart into a shower of harmless sparks. Double Flower Bloom, Claw Hook. In that same moment, Ace transformed into a jet of flames and flew past Robin, trying to catch up with Luffy. But as he did, 2 arms sprouted from his back at lightning speed. These arms were instantly coated in armament hockey and locked onto Ace, twisting his joints with precision. Crack. A sharp sound of bones dislocating echoed as Ace fell from the sky, crashing into the ground and leaving a deep crater. Since Robin's arms were infused with armament hockey, Ace couldn't turn into fire, and the joint lock move successfully dislocated his bones, bringing him down. Meanwhile, Luffy and Crocodile were still fighting fiercely inside the royal tomb of Alabasta. Now that Luffy knew water was Crocodile's weakness, the battle wasn't as one-sided as before. During their first encounter, Crocodile's Logia powers had made Luffy helpless, but after discovering that water could prevent Crocodile from turning into sand, Luffy, though still taking a beating, was at least able to fight back this time. And as always, Luffy's protagonist aura shone brightly. Wood could see that Crocodile had several chances to finish Luffy off during the fight, yet something always went wrong. Even when Crocodile drained all of Luffy's moisture, a miraculous water droplet would fall from the sky, bringing Luffy back to life. And even when Crocodile poisoned Luffy and had him defeated, instead of finishing him off, Crocodile couldn't resist giving a grand villainous speech, not realizing that villains always fall because they talk too much. Crocodile, as one of the 7 warlords of the sea, had once challenged Whitebeard himself. Even though he was now holed up in Alabasta, Wood couldn't believe Crocodile hadn't been to the New World. It was also hard to believe that as one of the 7 warlords, Crocodile wouldn't know how to use hockey, unlike some random goons in the New World. But in his battle with Luffy, Crocodile relied solely on his devil fruit powers, displaying a strange overconfidence in them. Crocodile was a schemer, a man who meticulously crafted plans to seize control of Alabasta. He was at least on the same level as Doflamingo in terms of intellect. This was likely why Doflamingo kept inviting Crocodile to work with him during the war at Manaford, while he mocked Moria. Despite being an above-average intelligence villain, Crocodile was acting like he had been affected by Luffy's plot armor, making increasingly dumb moves. He could have used his strongest techniques, but instead, he kept going for regular attacks. He could have overwhelmed Luffy, but he wasted time explaining his ambitions. Had his opponent been anyone other than Luffy, this series of questionable choices might still have worked, as he could have outlasted or overwhelmed a less plot-protected foe. But Crocodile had underestimated the power of being the son of the world. After all his posturing, Luffy's rage was about to reach its peak. As everyone knows, in a shonen series, the worst thing you can do is push the protagonist to the edge and then start monologuing. Either kill them quickly or don't bother at all. Dragging things out only leads to your downfall. Watching from the shadows, Wood smirked as Crocodile, believing himself the victor, continued to mock the poisoned Luffy. Wood knew it was over. Crocodile was doomed. Luffy had already activated his protagonist cheats. His health bar was locked, and his anger gauge was maxed out. All that was left was the inevitable comeback. And sure enough, although Crocodile had bragged about his deadly poison, it seemed to lose all its potency against Luffy. In the end, Crocodile was defeated, just as expected. The only difference from the original story was that this time, Luffy's final burst of strength wasn't enough to knock Crocodile completely unconscious. Defeated but unwilling to accept it, Crocodile used the last of his strength to summon a massive sandstorm with his sand fruit. Alabasta, being a desert kingdom, was the perfect environment for Crocodile's powers. Several massive sand tornadoes rose outside the city of Alubarna, and as they approached the capital, their sheer scale made them look like an unstoppable natural disaster. Only those who lived in Alabasta knew the true terror of these sandstorms. Watching the towering cyclones approach, both the royal army and the rebels stopped their fighting. It didn't matter anymore. If those sandstorms hit Alubarna, they would all be buried in sand within moments. At that point, it wouldn't just be the end of the royal army and the rebels. Alabasta itself would be erased from existence. Seeing the approaching tornadoes, Ace and Robin, who had been fighting, also paused. Ace, feeling the harsh wind sting his face, glared at Robin and shouted. "Is this the outcome you wanted? To bury all of Alabasta in sand?" Facing the approaching disaster, Ace felt utterly powerless. The situation had spiraled far beyond his ability to handle. Even though Ace's flame fruit was just as powerful as Crocodile's sand fruit, these massive sandstorms weren't just a result of Crocodile's powers. They were a force of nature. If this had been a different environment, Crocodile wouldn't have been able to create such devastation. But here, in the desert, his fruit's power was amplified to an unimaginable level. Ace could turn into fire and escape, but what about the others? What would happen to his brother Luffy, the Straw Hat Pirates, and the people of Alabasta? You're not a Logia-type user. Even if you know armament hockey, you can't survive a natural disaster like this. Ace shouted, staring angrily at Robin, desperate to find Luffy and protect him. But as the sandstorm approached, Ace realized something strange. Robin didn't seem worried at all. It seems Crocodile has failed. If he hadn't, he wouldn't have destroyed the kingdom he had worked so hard to take over. As for the people here, with that man around, I believe he'll stop this. Robin said, before spreading her wings and flying away, leaving Ace behind. Meanwhile, on the palace balcony, Crocodile, who had just been punched out of the royal tomb by Luffy, lay exhausted on the ground. He looked at Alubarna, now covered in sand, and began to laugh maniacally. So what if I lost to that brat? In the end, I'm still the victor. Even if I didn't get Alabasta or the Pluton, the Straw Hat Pirates and this entire kingdom will be buried in the sand. As for me, as the user of the sand fruit, do you really think I'd be buried by sand? Ha 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 ha. Straw Hat Luffy, Princess Vivi, and all of Alabasta, you'll all be buried. Alright. If you're going to be a villain, at least do it with some dignity. Can't win, so you decide to destroy everything? Alabasta may be poor, but I heard desert regions are rich in oil. Wouldn't it be a shame to let all that go to waste? Crocodile's insane laughter was interrupted by Wood, who appeared beside him out of nowhere, cutting off his delusional rant. You're still in this kingdom? Though I lost our bet, it seems I won't have to pay the price. Ha 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 ha. So what if you're a big shot in the underworld? Against a natural disaster like this, you'll be buried just the same. Crocodile had some understanding of Wood's strength. He knew that the former marine turned underworld big shot was a powerful swordsman who hadn't eaten a devil fruit. But no matter how strong a swordsman was, what could they do against a natural disaster? Even the strongest swordsman couldn't slice through a sandstorm, and without the powers of a Logia user, surviving this catastrophe was near impossible. You're right. I could cut through these sand tornadoes with my sword, but it would take a lot of effort and cause massive damage to the city, which wouldn't be ideal. But I have another way to deal with this. Wood's calm voice cut through the chaos, drawing the attention of both Cobra, who was helping Luffy to his feet, and the Straw Hat Pirates, who had just arrived after defeating the Baroque Works officers. Even though Wood was no longer wearing his coat, Vivi recognized him immediately. This was the man who had saved them earlier. What are you planning to do to our kingdom? Cobra and Luffy asked, standing ready to defend Alabasta. There's no time for explanations now. Wood replied calmly. If we keep chatting, your kingdom will be buried in sand. Or do you not care about that? Luffy and Zoro were ready to charge, but Vivi raised her hand to stop them. She didn't know why, but something inside her told her that this man could be trusted. And besides, at this point, they had no other choice. Chapter 316, Magic Can Create Miracles. Stop the desert tornadoes? I'd advise you not to waste your energy. Crocodile sneered, his voice dripping with disdain as he surveyed the situation. Even if you kill me now, it won't make any difference. My devil fruit powers were only the trigger. What's happening now has transcended my abilities. It's a natural disaster. Neither you nor anyone in Alabasta can escape it. You will all be buried along with this kingdom. The Desert King Crocodile, master of the sand fruit, stood helpless against the monstrous sandstorm. So naturally, he didn't believe for a second that Wood, a mere arms dealer, could stop the catastrophe. Just like you told Straw Hat Luffy, Crocodile, the world is far bigger than you imagine. Just as you, a warlord of the sea, were defeated by a rookie pirate, there are many things that may seem impossible to you. But that doesn't mean they are. As Wood spoke, he slowly drew 2 long blades from his waist and plunged them into the ground before him. Zoro, one of the Straw Hat Crew's swordsmen, couldn't take his eyes off the swords. His expertise as a swordsman told him immediately that Wood's swords were famous, named blades. Having a famous sword didn't necessarily make someone powerful. But those capable of wielding cursed blades were guaranteed to be strong. Powerful swordsmen always sought good swords, but cursed blades, like Wood's, chose their masters. Zoro knew his own cursed blade, the Sandai Kaitetsu, well, but the cursed energy emanating from Wood's sword was far stronger. The fact that Wood could control such a weapon spoke volumes about his power. This man was no doubt a true sword master. In this world of pirates, it wasn't surprising that a magical circle, something more fitting for the world of Mushoku Tensei, wouldn't appear here. Or rather, the magic circle that Wood conjured could only be seen by those who possessed magical power. And in this world, Wood was likely the only one with such power. Even though Princess Vivi and the others couldn't see the magic circle beneath their feet, they could sense the immense energy radiating from Wood. He was clearly doing something. Before long, the sky above Alabasta's capital, Alubarna, darkened. Thick clouds rolled in, casting a shadow over the city. Vivi and the others stared in shock as they realized that, at some point, a massive layer of clouds had gathered overhead. The clouds were dense and oppressive, and when a jagged flash of lightning streaked across the sky, the roar of thunder echoed throughout the kingdom. Since ancient times, the only thing that could fight a natural disaster was another natural disaster. The silver lightning bolts contrasted sharply with the pitch-black clouds, and as they clashed with the raging desert tornadoes, it was as if nature itself was battling for dominance. The sky responded to the twisting tornadoes below with volleys of thunderous lightning, each bolt striking with precise, deadly intent. Though the sand tornadoes were fierce, they couldn't withstand the relentless barrage of lightning strikes. With each flash of lightning, the tornadoes grew weaker, their swirling power slowly dissipating, until at last, they were completely dispersed. But it wasn't over yet. The tornadoes had stirred up vast amounts of sand, which now drifted ominously toward the city, carried on the faint remnants of the storm. Even though the tornadoes were gone, the sheer volume of sand was still a significant threat. If all that sand were to fall on the city, a third of Alubarna would be buried. Yet, compared to the earlier risk of the entire city being swallowed by the storm, this was almost a relief. For King Cobra and Princess Vivi, the possibility of saving so many lives was a miracle. As long as Alubarna wasn't completely buried, they could rebuild, and the remaining sand could be cleared away. The situation, while still dire, was far better than the hopeless destruction they had been facing. Just as Cobra and Vivi were about to thank Wood for saving the kingdom, they noticed that he hadn't moved from where he stood. His gaze was fixed on the sky above. Before they could ask what he was doing, a cold drop of rain splashed onto Vivi's face. As the first drop fell, it was quickly followed by more, until a steady rain began to pour from the thick clouds overhead, soon transforming into a torrential downpour. The sand, which had been swirling above the city, was caught by the rain and fell harmlessly to the ground outside the city walls. The rain wasn't just washing away the sand. It was lifting the weight of the 3-year drought that had hung over Alabasta like a curse. The people of Alabasta, whether they were part of the royal army or the rebel forces, had stopped fighting. All that remained were the joyous cries of the citizens as they danced in the rain, celebrating the end of their long suffering. To the common folk of Alabasta, it didn't matter who sat on the throne. They just wanted to survive, to live in peace. Wood, watching the scene unfold, shook his head slightly, a wry smile tugging at his lips. I should have put up a protective barrier before the rain started. Now I'm soaked. My dignity just took a nosedive. But as he stood there, drenched to the bone, Wood admitted to himself that the feeling of rain after such a long drought was quite refreshing. Not everyone was enjoying the rain, though. Crocodile, the so-called Desert King, lay sprawled in the dirt, staring up at the rain with disbelief written all over his face. He knew better than anyone why Alabasta had been suffering from a drought. For it to suddenly rain like this, it defied everything. You must have eaten a devil fruit. Crocodile spat, his voice dripping with frustration. And you broke our agreement. You saved Princess Vivi and the Straw Hats. Earlier, when Crocodile's underlings had reported that a mysterious figure had saved Princess Vivi and her companions, he had dismissed it as an excuse for their failure. But now, after hearing Vivi's words and seeing the truth for himself, Crocodile realized that the mysterious figure was none other than Wood. In a way, I did break our agreement, Wood said casually. But if it wasn't for my reminder, you wouldn't have taken the Straw Hats seriously from the start, right? And even though Vivi arrived in Alubarna, she wasn't able to stop the fighting between the royal army and the rebels. As for me helping the Straw Hats, well, I helped you too, didn't I? You haven't wondered why Fire Fist Ace didn't interfere in your fight with Luffy? Wood smirked as he continued. One last correction, my abilities don't come from a devil fruit. It's called magic. So I'm not just a swordsman. I'm also a magician capable of performing miracles. Crocodile scoffed, spitting again in frustration. Magic? You expect me to believe that? The crocodile could grudgingly accept that Wood had helped stall Fire Fist Ace, giving him some breathing room. He couldn't bring himself to believe in something as ridiculous as magic. Powerful individuals often kept their abilities secret, but surely, Wood didn't need to resort to some fairy tale to explain his powers. These days, people will believe all kinds of lies, but the moment you tell the truth, no one believes it. Wood muttered to himself. But not everyone was skeptical. One individual, though badly beaten, looked at Wood with stars in his eyes. The mention of magic had struck a chord with him. Magic? That's so cool. Are you a real-life magician? Luffy exclaimed, his face lighting up in pure excitement. He was about to ask if he could learn magic when he was promptly smacked on the head. Idiot. Magic doesn't exist. He's obviously tricking you. Wood watched in shock as the orange-haired girl, Nami, delivered a punch so powerful that it knocked Luffy, a rubber man, out cold. She hadn't even used hockey, yet she had managed to deal a devastating blow. Even after everything Crocodile threw at him, Luffy never passed out, but one hit from her, and he's down for the count. Wood's eyes narrowed. So it's true, then. The rumors were right. The real powerhouse of the Straw Hat crew isn't Luffy, Zoro, or Sanji. It's the Navigator, Nami. The so-called weak trio of the Straw Hat pirates were clearly far more formidable than they appeared. In fact, when it came down to it, Nami, Chopper, and Usopp might be the most dangerous members of the crew. As Wood reflected on these fan-favorite characters from his past life, he couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia. But now, these Straw Hat pirates were nothing more than inexperienced rookies. If Wood wanted, he could defeat them all single-handedly, without even using his swords. Thank you once again for saving us and our kingdom, Princess Vivi said, bowing deeply to Wood. May I ask for your name, so we can properly express our gratitude? This wasn't the first time Wood had saved them. This was the second time he had came to their rescue, and this time, he had saved the entire kingdom of Alabasta. Given Wood's reputation in the New World, it was rare for people not to recognize him on sight. But here, on the first half of the Grand Line, it was a different story. His bounty poster was over 10 years old, and since the world government had given up pursuing him, there hadn't been any recent updates. In 10 years, Wood's appearance had changed enough that even Vivi and Cobra couldn't recognize him. Well, I'm just a passing handsome merchant. Before Wood could finish, Crocodile, still lying on the ground, broke into mocking laughter. Ha ha ha. You really think this guy is some kind of hero, don't you? He's one of the most notorious criminals in the world, a former Marine turned outlaw with a 1 billion Bailey bounty, the man the world government stopped chasing because he was too dangerous. Wood. You think he saved Alabasta out of kindness? Don't be naive. He is after something much bigger than that. Your kingdom might not even be enough to satisfy his ambitions. Crocodile's laughter echoed through the air as Wood sighed, shaking his head. The arms dealer had intended to keep things simple, but Crocodile's outburst had exposed his identity. As the weight of Crocodile's words sank in, Vivi and Cobra's expressions grew conflicted. Could Crocodile be right? Was Wood truly as dangerous as he claimed? Meanwhile, the Straw Hats stared at Wood in shock. Could this really be the man Luffy had been talking about defeating all along? Chapter 317, Long Time No See, Smoker. Wait a minute. If this guy really is Wood, the ex-Marine trader, how could Luffy, who's always seen him as a target, not recognize him? Then again, Considering Luffy's unique ability to remember faces and the fact that Wood's wanted poster was from over a decade ago, it's actually not impossible that he wouldn't recognize him. Captain, the Navy has already entered Alubarna. Given our current status, it might not be wise to interact with them. Robin, now soaked from the heavy downpour, her clothes clinging to her figure, flew down and landed beside Wood. If you don't mind, you're welcome to take shelter in our palace, Princess Vivi offered. King Cobra, standing nearby, looked like he wanted to say something, but seeing the firm determination on his daughter's face, he remained silent. Vivi had grown up. To be honest, if it hadn't been for her recruiting the Straw Hats to help, the Nefertari dynasty might have been completely destroyed under his watch. Cobra respected her judgment, and although he was unsure of Wood's true motives, there was no denying that he had just saved their kingdom. Vivi had a similar thought. She had confidence in her ability to judge people, just like when she first trusted the Straw Hat Pirates. To her, Wood was different from Crocodile. He didn't seem like one of those ambitious, evil pirates. And given the sheer power he displayed, if he really had ill intentions toward Alabasta, there wasn't much they could do to stop him. So instead of showing fear, Vivi thought it better to display the dignity of the Nefertari royal family and extend gratitude to their savior. Former warlord Crocodile, we've gathered enough evidence to prove your violation of the world government's rules and your illegal actions against the kingdom of Alabasta. Under orders from Marine headquarters, your title as a warlord has been revoked, and you are hereby placed under arrest. Captain Smoker leaped onto the palace balcony, clutching his dual long-handled jut, a soaked cigar hanging from his lips, as he recited his official lines. But then he froze. The sight of a particular figure standing before him caused Smoker's body to tremble uncontrollably. Captain Smoker. His subordinate, Tashigi, noticed something was wrong. Smoker's reaction was anything but normal. Before she could ask, Smoker's lower body transformed into white smoke, and he charged forward, gripping his jut tightly. Sanji and Zoro immediately moved to protect the unconscious Luffy. They recognized the Marine officer. Smoker, from Logetown. For reasons they never fully understood, the man had been hounding them like a mad dog, determined to take Luffy down. But just as Sanji and Zoro, both injured, prepared to fend off Smoker's attack, they realized his target wasn't them. It was someone else entirely. Well, Smoker, long time no see," Wood said, his expression calm. "Still stuck as a captain after all these years? You were once my little underling, weren't you?" With no visible effort, Wood stood his ground as Smoker hurtled toward him, jut aimed at his chest. Smoker thought he had him, but just before the jut made contact, Wood casually raised 2 fingers and stopped the weapon in its tracks. White Snake. Realizing his initial attack was blocked, Smoker quickly abandoned one of his jut and activated his smoke fruit powers, turning his arm into a giant white smoke serpent that wrapped itself tightly around Wood. Seeing this, both Sanji and Zoro winced. They had been on the receiving end of that same move before, back in Logetown. The smoke looked harmless but was surprisingly difficult to escape. If it hadn't been for the sudden storm back then, they likely wouldn't have been able to leave Logetown at all. "Do you really think a move like this can hold me?" Wood asked, his voice steady. A powerful burst of energy erupted from Wood's body, and the smoke constraining him was instantly scattered into the air. Before Smoker could react, he found a black fist speeding toward his face, growing larger in his field of vision with every passing second. Still aiming for the face, just like old times. Smoker thought bitterly before Wood's fist connected with his cheek, sending him flying like a cannonball. The impact was brutal, and Sanji and Zoro, watching from the sidelines, were completely stunned. The Marine captain, who had given them so much trouble and seemed practically invincible, had been blown away with a single punch. "Smoker, after all these years, you still haven't improved one bit," Wood taunted. "If anything, you've become too reliant on your devil fruit powers. Your physical abilities have actually regressed." "Shut up!" Smoker roared, blood trickling from his face as he struggled to get back on his feet. "Don't talk down to me like you're my superior. Ever since you betrayed the Marines, we've been on opposite sides. You, of all people, were expected to become someone great in the Navy, so why did you throw it all away? What do you even know, Wood? I had no choice but to eat the devil fruit to try and catch up to you." Before Wood could respond, Smoker charged again, weapon raised, refusing to give up. "All right, then." Wood sighed. "I'll show you just how vast the gap between us still is, even with your devil fruit powers. In the New World, hockey is what separates the strong from the weak. Devil fruits? They're just tools. Secondary to real strength." Drawing his sword, Wood's demeanor shifted entirely. Zoro, being a swordsman, instantly felt the oppressive energy radiating from Wood. It was a familiar sensation, one he had only experienced once before, in the presence of the world's greatest swordsman, Dracul Mihawk. The air itself seemed heavier around Wood, the same way it had with Mihawk. Back then, Zoro had struggled just to draw his sword in front of that overwhelming force. Now, he felt the same pressure from Wood. But unlike Mihawk's sharp, exposed killing intent, Wood's energy was more contained. Dangerous but controlled. Hyaki Yagio sword style. One sword technique, Atachi. A fierce gust of wind howled from Wood's blade, forming a crescent-shaped slash that shot towards Smoker. By the time it reached him, it had grown into a massive blade of wind, several dozen meters wide. Realizing the danger, Smoker immediately raised his twin jut in defense. But when the blade of wind reached him, he finally understood just how vast the difference between them was. The force of the attack sent Smoker flying backward, his feet carving deep trenches in the ground as he tried in vain to hold his ground. The crescent slash barreled through the courtyard, eventually crashing through the palace walls and out into the city. Smoker's jut flew from his hands, and his body was sliced clean in two. Fortunately for Smoker, Wood hadn't imbued his attack with Haki, so when the crescent slash bisected him, Smoker's body simply turned into smoke. The slash flew out of the palace and landed in a deserted part of the city, carving a massive trench into the ground that stretched for miles. The Straw Hats, Princess Vivi, and the others stared in shock at the devastation left in the wake of Wood's attack. Zoro, in particular, was both amazed and excited, his hands instinctively gripping the hilts of his three swords. The urge to challenge Wood surged within him. Ever since his battle with Mr. One, Zoro had gained new insights into swordsmanship, reaching the level of being able to cut steel. He had become a true swordsman, but now, standing before Wood, he sensed the same level of mastery that Mihawk had displayed. Smoker's body reformed on the ground, his face pale, as he coughed up blood. Though Wood hadn't used Haki in his attack, Smoker's attempt to block the slash had caused internal injuries. As he struggled to stand, his subordinate, Tashigi, drew her sword, ready to fight. But before she could act, several arms sprouted from her body, disarming her and binding her arms to her sides like shackles. Smoker. Tashigi called out, struggling against the restraint, but she was helpless. Smoker, seeing his subordinate captured, was about to attack when suddenly, Wood appeared behind him, a sword now pressed against Smoker's throat, its blade covered in Haki. None of the Straw Hats had even seen him move. One moment he had been standing far away, and the next, he was right behind Smoker, faster than their eyes could follow. To them, it was almost like teleportation. Smoker, how about we end this fight here? If I remember correctly, the world government stopped pursuing me a long time ago. You're a Marine, and I'm a pirate, but you don't really have any reason to arrest me, do you? Besides, if I kill you here, it'll just cause me a lot of trouble with the government. I'd rather avoid being put back on their wanted list. Naturally, Smoker, who had always followed his own path and often disregarded orders, had no intention of backing down. But before he could respond, Wood's hand struck the back of his neck, knocking him out cold. Turning to Tashigi, Wood spoke with a calm tone. Smoker's always been stubborn. He never listens to reason. So, Tashigi, right? You were ordered to help Alabasta deal with the rebellion and capture Crocodile, correct? Well, the man lying over there. Yes, the one with the scar. Is Crocodile. The situation in Alabasta is already resolved, and Crocodile's been defeated. Just take him back to Marine headquarters, claim your victory, and let's pretend this encounter never happened. Deal? Tashigi, bound and conflicted, hesitated. Her sense of justice was strong, but the situation was grim. Wood had them completely outmatched, and even if they wanted to arrest him, they didn't have the power to do so. It wasn't just Smoker who was outclassed. If Wood wanted to, he could wipe out the entire Marine force stationed in Alabasta in an instant. Reluctantly, Tashigi agreed. Smoker, still unconscious, and the defeated Crocodile were taken away, as the Marines began their retreat. Soon after, Marine headquarters dispatched Vice Admiral Momouzagi to Alabasta to oversee the situation and personally escort Crocodile to Impel Down. Though Alabasta had been saved, the world government sent reinforcements to ensure stability, as Crocodile's defeat was a serious matter. Chapter 318, The Straw Hats Who Want to Challenge Wood. After finally enjoying the long-lost luxury of the royal baths in Alabasta, Wood and Robin, with Princess Vivi accompanying them, left Halubarna. However, before leaving, Wood received a gesture of gratitude from Alabasta. In return for the help he provided during their time of crisis and to strengthen the kingdom's defenses against future pirate invasions, Alabasta placed a large order for weapons from Wood's company. While Alabasta had been struggling financially, even to the point where Vivi couldn't afford to pay Nami the promised reward, Crocodile's defeat had revealed a treasure trove of wealth left behind by the former warlord. As one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Crocodile had amassed a fortune during his time in Alabasta, even though his wealth didn't quite rival that of an entire nation. According to the agreement between Wood and Crocodile, all of Crocodile's riches would belong to Wood after Crocodile's downfall. But instead of taking the treasure for himself, Wood informed Princess Vivi and King Cobra that the riches would be used to cover the costs of the weapons Alabasta was purchasing, as well as solving their water crisis. Yes, before leaving Alabasta, Wood had even gone to several major cities and cast high-level water magic to provide the kingdom with some much-needed relief. Even though Crocodile had been defeated, Alabasta's 3-year drought was not something that could be easily solved in a day. Alabasta's economy relied heavily on the few oases on the island. Yet, now, even Yuba, the former commercial hub, had been reduced to desert. Restoring the kingdom to its former glory was going to take a long time, even without Crocodile's interference. Currently, the kingdom could barely sustain its population, but that wasn't the only challenge they faced. Looming on the horizon was the impending payment of the heavenly tribute to the celestial dragons. Becoming a member nation of the world government and receiving their protection wasn't free. In addition to attending the reverie every few years, member nations were required to pay this so-called heavenly tribute. The tribute, in essence, was nothing more than a protection fee paid to the world government in exchange for their protection. Since Crocodile's arrival in Alabasta, the kingdom's income had plummeted. For the past few years, they'd been draining their reserves just to pay the tribute. But this year, Alabasta simply wouldn't be able to make the payment. Cobra had come to realize that despite paying the tribute every year, the world government had failed to protect them from the devastation brought by Crocodile, one of their own warlords. After what happened with Crocodile, Cobra understood that for a kingdom to truly be strong, it had to rely on its own strength. So, in secret, Cobra and Wood formed a partnership. If Alabasta stopped paying the tribute, they would lose the protection of the world government, so they needed to bolster their own strength. Weapons were an essential part of that plan. As Wood and Vivi traveled through the various cities of Alabasta, casting water magic to provide relief, Wood was also surveying the land for something specific. And finally, in a remote town, he found what he had been looking for. "You've done so much to help Alabasta," Robin said, her curiosity piqued as she watched Wood examine a strange, black liquid. Even allowing them to order weapons on credit, and helping to rebuild their cities. Was it all for this? Wood chuckled as he examined the dark, viscous substance in his hand. Black-brown in color, with a greenish glow, a pungent odor, and a thick, oily texture. He snapped his fingers, and the liquid ignited, burning like a powerful fuel. Yup. No doubt about it. This is crude oil. Seeing Wood confirm that this was indeed what he had been searching for, Princess Vivi breathed a sigh of relief. In this world, no one helps others for no reason. Both Vivi and King Cobra, as members of the royal family, understood this truth well. For someone as influential as Wood, his help was either due to ulterior motives or because Alabasta had something of value to him. Wood, after all, wasn't like the Straw Hat Pirates. A small group of idealistic dreamers. He was a major figure in the underworld, with a vast and powerful organization behind him. If he had no interest in Alabasta, they would have had more reason to be worried, suspecting some hidden agenda, unless he really was a distant relative of the Nefertari family. As it turned out, Wood's generous terms were all contingent on the fact that Alabasta held something he had been looking for. Now that he had found it, Vivi felt genuinely happy for him. "So, this is what you were after all along?" Vivi asked. "The locals call it black oil. They consider it a bad omen because of its foul smell, and prolonged exposure to its fumes makes people sick." Wood wasn't surprised. This world already had more advanced technology like gunpowder, which overshadowed the utility of crude oil. And for a desert kingdom like Alabasta, crude oil couldn't be used as water, and it posed a danger in the heat. So it made sense that the locals kept their distance from it. However, Wood knew that if refined properly, crude oil could serve as the best energy source, much more than a simple fuel for burning. It was a resource that could propel an entire era forward. With oil as a fuel, along with the advancements made by his weapons company, who would need pirate ships made of wood anymore? Once massive steel warships hit the seas, even the fleets of the four emperors would be nothing compared to their destructive power. And if oil was available as fuel, the idea of planes in this medieval world wasn't far-fetched either. Steel ships dominating the seas, planes ruling the skies. Conquering the Grand Line would be child's play. Oil, after all, forms deep within the Earth's crust, derived from ancient biological matter. It's why Wood believed that Alabasta, with its ancient deserts, might have oil hidden beneath its sands. "Princess Vivi, this is indeed what I was searching for. I suggest you consider establishing a new city here. As long as you have this black oil, our weapons company will buy as much as you can produce. I guarantee that in no time, Alabasta will not only overcome its current difficulties but also become one of the wealthiest kingdoms on the Grand Line." Of course, Wood wasn't going to explain how to refine crude oil into petroleum to Princess Vivi. But the price he offered for the raw oil was more than generous. As long as Alabasta wasn't foolish, they would realize that partnering with Wood was in their best interest. This black oil had little value to them or anyone else, but in Wood's hands, it was priceless. Upon returning to the royal palace in Alubarna, Princess Vivi, on behalf of Alabasta, signed a series of agreements with Wood, formalizing their partnership. Meanwhile, as Wood and Vivi had been searching for crude oil, the Straw Hat Pirates had fully recovered from their injuries. Wood couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of people in this world. The Straw Hats had fought Crocodile and the Baroque Orcs agents to near death. Some were poisoned, others critically injured, and even Nami had been left covered in wounds from Ms. Doublefinger's attacks. Yet in just a few days, they had all bounced back to full health. Something even healing magic couldn't achieve so quickly in other worlds. Wood. Fight me. Luffy declared, his eyes burning with determination. Upon waking up and learning from his crewmates that the person who had helped them was the infamous ex-Marine Wood. The very man he had dreamed of defeating. Luffy couldn't help but feel like he had missed his chance. Now that Wood had returned and Luffy's injuries were healed, there was no stopping him from challenging the man he had always wanted to face in battle. As usual, warnings about the difference in their strength were the furthest thing from Luffy's mind. He was just like the little kid who used to challenge Shanks. Eager to fight someone he admired. "No, Luffy, you can't beat him," Nami and Usopp shouted as they tried to restrain him. "That Marine Captain Smoker who kept chasing us couldn't even last 3 moves against him." Having barely survived their encounter with Crocodile, Nami and Usopp had no desire to pick a fight with someone even more dangerous. Besides, Crocodile had been a clear enemy. He was threatening their friend Vivi and her kingdom. But Wood had done nothing but help them. Why provoke someone like that? "I can beat him." It's just like with Crocodile. You never know the outcome until the battle is over. Luffy insisted, his confidence unwavering. During the fight between Wood and Smoker, Luffy had been unconscious, so he had no idea just how easily Wood had defeated the Marine. Even if he had known, it wouldn't have made a difference. Luffy believed in his own strength. "This could be interesting," Zoro said, unable to suppress a grin. "If we're talking about a duel with a master swordsman, I'm in. It's been a long time since I've had the chance to cross swords with a real blade master." "Zoro. I'm the one who's going to fight Wood," Luffy shot back. "Fights don't have a cue, idiot. Besides, Wood's clearly a swordsman, so what's a brawler like you doing challenging him?" And just like that, Zoro and Luffy were at each other's throats, bickering over who would get to fight Wood. Things escalated further when Sanji joined in. Learning that both Luffy and Zoro were planning to challenge Wood, Sanji couldn't resist getting involved. Not to mention trying to impress Robin, who was standing nearby watching. "Well, if all 3 of you want to fight me, why don't you come at me together?" Wood suggested, an amused smile playing on his lips. "That way, you might last a little longer. Swordsmanship, martial arts, leg techniques. I know a bit of everything. So I should be able to give you a good challenge." While Luffy was upset about having to share his fight, Zoro and Sanji had no objections. Luffy, on the other hand, was already plotting to be the first one to land a blow on Wood. In the royal training grounds, Wood stood calmly at one end, while at the other stood the 3 strongest members of the Straw Hat Pirates, the Rubber Man Captain, the directionally challenged swordsman, and a love-struck cook. "Vivi, do you think they have a chance of winning?" Nami asked, looking excited as she turned to Vivi. After hearing about the upcoming sparring match, Nami had set up a little betting pool, and King Cobra, along with the royal guards, had placed quite a few bets. Since Vivi hadn't been able to pay Nami's reward for saving Alabasta, Nami figured this little betting pool would help her make some extra cash. "I think they can do it," Vivi replied, though her voice was hesitant. The Straw Hat Pirates weren't just Alabasta's saviors. They were her dear friends. So, despite knowing Wood's strength, she couldn't bring herself to bet against them. Chapter 319, the 3 Straw Hat Fighters instantly defeated. "So, since you have so much faith in Luffy and the others, aren't you going to put a wager on it?" Nami teased, subtly trying to lure Vivi into placing a bet. Asking for Vivi's support was just a ploy. Nami's true goal was to make Vivi place a bet. She had become desperate to not leave empty-handed, and she wasn't even sparing Vivi's pocket money. Apparently, even King Cobra and the others had fallen for this trap earlier. While they knew Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji didn't have great odds of winning, it didn't seem right to bet against the people who had saved their kingdom. "This sounds interesting. May I place a bet as well?" Robin, who had been quietly observing the Straw Hat crew's antics, finally spoke up. Her gaze had been particularly focused on Nami. Ever since Robin had learned that Wood knew Nami's measurements, she had been quietly harboring a grudge and was curious to see if Nami had any special qualities. However, Robin soon realized that the younger girl wasn't taller than her, Her chest wasn't larger, and aside from being a bit more bubbly and youthful, there didn't seem to be any advantages Nami had over her. Wood couldn't have been interested in her just for her youth, right? After all, when Robin had first met Wood, she had been around 12 or 13 years old. Excluding the age factor, the only other difference was their personalities. Nami was more cheerful and energetic. Was that what she was missing? Should she try to change her personality? That didn't seem easy to pull off. No way. This betting pool is only for Alabasta personnel, Nami said, shaking her head vigorously when Robin expressed interest in joining. Robin was with Wood, and if she placed a bet, it was obvious she would bet on her boss to win. Moreover, guilt-tripping tactics only worked on Alabastans, not on someone like Robin. Clearly, Nami herself didn't think the trio had much of a chance of winning, which is why she had set up this sure-win bet. They're your crewmates, right? Do you really have that little faith in them? Robin smiled sweetly, turning Nami's own guilt tactics against her. However, Robin had underestimated Nami's sense of priorities. When it came to choosing between supporting her crewmates and getting more money, Nami would choose the latter every time. Well, what if I bet that our captain will beat your entire trio in under a minute? Would you still refuse that bet? Robin asked, her smile never wavering. A minute to defeat all three of them. Nami was taken aback by Robin's bold claim. While she believed Wood could defeat Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, especially after seeing him easily overpower Smoker and sensing how cautious Crocodile had been around him. Defeating them in under a minute? That was harder to believe. Nami hadn't known the Straw Hats for that long, but it was long enough to understand their incredible tenacity. Sanji aside, Luffy and Zoro always pushed themselves to the brink of death in every fight. Sure, beating them was one thing, but knocking them out so they couldn't get up again? That was a whole different challenge. Especially in under a minute. So, what do you say? I'm willing to bet 1 billion Baileys that our captain can defeat all three of them in under a minute. Robin said calmly. 1 billion Baileys? ? Nami, Usopp, and Chopper all gasped in unison. Nami's eyes instantly turned into berry symbols. 1 billion Baileys. Even all of Alabasta probably couldn't scrape together that much money. Yet, from the way Robin spoke, it seemed like that sum was nothing to her. Don't worry about whether I can actually pay. Wood's Weapon Company does business across the entire sea, and the wealth we've accumulated far exceeds what you can imagine. And besides, I manage all the finances for the company. Even if we disregard the company's funds, Wood alone is worth 1 billion Baileys. If I lose, I could hand him over to the Navy to cash in the bounty. Hearing Robin's casual explanation, Usopp and Chopper swallowed nervously. Good grief, both of these women were terrifying. Just like Nami, Robin was the type to consider selling their captain if the price was right. The temptation of 1 billion Baileys was hard for Nami to resist, but if they lost, their crew would be in debt by the same amount. Yes, if she won, all the money would go into Nami's personal stash. But if she lost, the entire crew would have to share the burden of the debt. That's how Nami always did her calculations. It was just her style. After a moment of hesitation, Nami finally gave in to temptation and agreed to Robin's extravagant wager, despite the objections of Usopp and Chopper. Miss Nami, Miss Vivi, Miss Robin. I swear I'll win this for you. Sanji called out, his eyes brimming with affection as he prepared for the fight. Nami, however, ruthlessly dashed his hopes. No, I don't need you to win. You just have to hold out for more than a minute before losing. Listen carefully, Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji. No matter what happens, even if every bone in your body gets broken, you have to hold out for at least a minute before you get knocked out. And especially you, Zoro. If you don't last at least a minute, your debt to me will double. Zoro's face darkened at Nami's harsh ultimatum. Unlike the love-struck Sanji, Zoro was more irritated at Nami than anyone else in that moment. Forget fighting Wood. He wanted to use his swords on the greedy navigator. She's definitely going to hell, Zoro muttered, casting a dark look at Nami. Meanwhile, on the other side, the trio couldn't help but feel insulted by Robin's confident bet. Sure, they acknowledged Wood was strong, but being underestimated like this was still infuriating. Gamu Gamu no. Pistol. Luffy was the first to charge at Wood, launching his signature stretching punch to signal the start of the fight. For the Straw Hats, there was no point in planning tactics. It was just too hard for them, and Luffy could never remember strategies anyway. Zoro and Sanji were rivals who would never cooperate, so the crew always fought their own way, relying on unspoken teamwork to cover each other. Luffy's fist, powered by the elasticity of his rubber body, shot toward Wood with the speed and force of a bullet. But in the world of One Piece, medieval-era pistols weren't exactly the fastest weapons. For most people, Luffy's attack would seem fast, but to Wood, it was almost slow motion. Without even moving his feet, Wood simply tilted his head to the side, easily dodging Luffy's punch. But before the fist could snap back, Luffy pulled hard on his outstretched arm, launching a follow-up attack. Gamu Gamu no Gatling. This time, Luffy's fists flew wildly, attacking from every angle as his arm swung around in unpredictable arcs. It was an overwhelming flurry of punches meant to overwhelm his opponent. However, to Luffy's shock, not a single punch landed. No. More accurately, every punch missed, as Wood effortlessly dodged each one without moving from his spot. One sword style, Lion's Song. As Luffy's punches fell short, Zoro dashed in from the side, drawing his sword in a flash, aiming for a deadly strike with his newly mastered iron cutting technique. Learned in his battle against Mr. One. Clang. But instead of the satisfying sound of a successful cut, Zoro's sword stopped dead. He looked down, stunned. His blade hadn't even left its sheath. Somehow, Wood had managed to press down on Zoro's sword with his own scabbard, preventing the blade from being drawn at all. A successful AI strike requires utmost speed. Your blade should leave its sheath before your foot even touches the ground. Wood remarked calmly, barely acknowledging Zoro's efforts. Your swordsmanship is promising, and you may indeed become a great swordsman one day, but your draw speed still needs work. Zoro gritted his teeth, frustrated but unwilling to back down. Letting go of his sheathed sword, he instead drew his other two blades. Tenku, Cursed Blade, and Astso. Using the momentum from Wood's block to spin in the air. Two-sword style, Bull Demon. Zoro's two swords slashed through the air in a brutal arc, a spectral bull's horns appearing behind him as he unleashed his powerful attack. But once again, Wood deflected the strikes with his scabbard, and before Zoro could react, a sharp pain erupted from his chest. Blood sprayed into the air as Zoro staggered backward. There's no doubt you'll become a great swordsman someday, but right now, you're still too green. Wood said, his voice calm. This blade, Tenku, is a cursed sword of incredible power, and Astso is a great grade sword. One of the 21 Owazama. Both are just as deadly. Zoro, always determined, tried to say something, but the pain overwhelmed him, and he collapsed, unconscious. Damn it, Mosshead. Pull yourself together. Sanji shouted, shocked to see Zoro, who had once taken a direct hit from Mihawk and survived. Taken down so quickly. Kashikuda shoot. Sanji leapt into the air, appearing behind Wood, and aimed a powerful kick at the back of his neck, confident that he had found an opening. Wood had just defeated Zoro. He couldn't possibly block this, could he? Sanji's kick sliced through the air, creating a sharp wind that tore through the space between them. But just as Sanji was about to land his blow, Wood smirked and effortlessly twisted his body, delivering a counter kick from below. Using a spinning technique to amplify your kicking power. Not bad. I like using that move myself. Wood said, his eyes sharp. But your technique is unrefined, and my strength far surpasses yours. Boom. Their legs collided with an explosive crack, and the air around them seemed to rupture from the force. But in that instant, Sanji heard a sickening crack echo through the air. Pain shot through his leg as the bones in his shin gave way under the pressure. In the next moment, Sanji was flying backward, his body skidding across the ground as he crashed into the dirt, leaving a deep trail in his wake. Gamu Gamu no. Rocket. As Sanji was launched away, Luffy made his final charge, stretching his body forward like a slingshot, propelling himself straight upward with tremendous speed. His fists trailed behind him, ready to deliver a crushing blow to Wood's abdomen. This was Luffy's strongest attack in his current arsenal. However, for Wood, it was no more of a threat than the others. 6 powers, Iron Body, Iron Body. Chapter 320, The Girl Who Evolved into a Stunning Woman. Ainkling. As Luffy's hands slammed into Wood's abdomen, a sound like striking a massive bell echoed through the air. A thin wisp of smoke rose from where Wood's abdomen had absorbed the blow, but other than that, Wood was completely unscathed. He didn't even take a single step back. Seeing Wood standing there unshaken, Luffy wore an expression of utter disbelief. Previously, whether it was Crocodile or Krieg back in the East Blue, covered in full body armor, they had both been sent flying by Luffy's Gamu Gamu no rocket attack. But now, that same attack had done nothing against Wood. In fact, Luffy couldn't shake the feeling that instead of hitting flesh, he had just struck a wall of solid steel. Arm fist. Sky-shattering strike. Before Luffy could even recover from his surprise and prepare another attack, he saw a black fist rapidly growing larger in front of his eyes. Seeing the punch coming toward him, Luffy clenched his teeth. He raised his own fist to strike at Wood's head, thinking that as a rubber human, his body wouldn't be hurt by a physical blow. But he was about to find out just how wrong he was. Just as Wood's blackened fist connected with Luffy's face, Luffy's own fist didn't even reach Wood. The iron-hard punch buried itself into Luffy's face without resistance, sending out a shock wave of air. Luffy's entire body was launched like a baseball in a home run hit, flying through the air at supersonic speed. After smashing through a section of the palace wall hundreds of meters away, Luffy crashed to the ground, eyes white, completely unconscious. "Well, it seems the fight is over," Robin said sweetly, turning to look at Nami beside her. "I don't think it's been more than a minute, has it?" Seeing the Straw Hat Crew's top 3 fighters all lying on the ground, Nami crumpled to the floor in shock, looking utterly defeated. Had the battle lasted more than a minute? Of course not. If it had been closer to 50 seconds, Nami might have tried to weasel out of it. But the truth was that the entire fight had lasted barely half a minute. Despite the fierce action, it was over in a flash. In fact, Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji had been the ones launching most of the attacks, while Wood had mostly remained on the defensive. Even more terrifying, Wood hadn't moved from his original spot throughout the entire fight. To defeat all 3, Wood had used nothing more than a single sword strike, 1 kick, and a punch. Nami wasn't heartbroken about her comrades being knocked out. What hurt her most was that she had just lost 1 billion Baileys in a bet. Their captain's bounty was only 30 million Baileys. Even if she sold Luffy 30 times over, she still couldn't cover the debt. As Usopp placed the heavily injured, unconscious trio together for Chopper to tend to, Wood approached them, causing Usopp and Chopper to look up in fear. "Though it was just a sparring match, I realize I overdid it and injured them too severely," Wood said. "To make up for my mistake and to ensure you don't fall behind schedule, I'll heal their injuries myself." Holy healing magic. Wind of restoration. Wood placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, using it as a conduit, while his other hand stretched out toward the unconscious Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji. Suddenly, in the still air, a soft green wind began to blow, carrying a faint fragrance as it surrounded the 3 injured fighters. As the glowing green particles touched their bodies, the others watched in awe as their wounds began to heal rapidly. Though Sanji and Luffy had mostly internal injuries, Zoro's chest wound had been particularly severe. Yet now, before everyone's eyes, his once gaping wound was closing at an astonishing rate. As the group marveled at this miraculous scene,